Hello, and welcome back to our little corner of wonder. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. You know, there's something magical about these quiet moments we share together, isn't there? Maybe you've had one of those days where the world felt a little too fast, a little too loud, and now you've found your way here, to this gentle space where we can slow down and simply breathe. I wonder, have you ever caught yourself looking in the mirror and felt that quiet curiosity stirring? That soft question floating through your mind about where we all came from, not just you and me, but all of us, this entire human family scattered across our beautiful blue planet. Before we begin this journey together, I want you to know that thousands of curious souls just like you have joined our community of gentle explorers. If this story touches something in you tonight, consider staying with us. There are so many more whispered secrets of the universe waiting to unfold. So take a moment now. Let your shoulders drop just a little. Feel yourself settling into wherever you are. Your favorite chair, your bed, that cozy spot you've claimed as yours. Let your breathing find its own quiet rhythm, like waves lapping softly against an ancient shore. Tonight, we're going to wander together through the most extraordinary love story ever told. The story of us. Not the story written in textbooks, with harsh fluorescent lighting, but the one written in starlight and stone, in the patient language of time itself. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. Millions of years ago, in the golden grasslands of Africa, under skies so vast they seemed to hold all the dreams that would ever be dreamed, our ancestors took their very first steps. Imagine them, these brave souls, standing tall for the first time, their hands reaching toward horizons they couldn't yet name, carrying within their hearts the seeds of every poem that would ever be written, every song that would ever be sung, every gentle moment like this one we're sharing right now. Before we were human, the origins of life on Earth. Take a moment to look at your hand. Really look at it. The fingers that can grasp, the palm that can hold, the intricate web of bones and muscles that move with such precision. Now imagine what if I told you that this same hand shares its deepest blueprint with the fin of a fish that lived 400 million years ago? What if the story of how you came to exist began not with your parents, or even your distant ancestors, but with the very first spark of life on a planet that was nothing like the world you know today? Our story begins in the most unlikely of places. Not in a garden, not in a moment of divine creation, but in the churning, violent cauldron of early Earth. Picture our planet as it was 4.5 billion years ago. There were no continents as we know them, no blue oceans reflecting peaceful skies. Instead, Earth was a hellish world of molten rock, volcanic eruptions that made today's most devastating disasters look like gentle campfires, and an atmosphere so toxic it would kill any modern life form in seconds. The surface was bombarded constantly by asteroids and comets, each impact releasing energy equivalent to millions of nuclear bombs. The very ground beneath what would one day become your feet was liquid fire. And yet, in this seemingly impossible environment, something miraculous was stirring, something that would eventually lead to you, sitting here contemplating your own existence. The first chapter of our human story isn't about humans at all. It's about the emergence of life itself from lifelessness. Scientists call this abiogenesis, but think of it more like the universe's first magic trick. Somewhere between 4 and 3.8 billion years ago, in pools of primordial soup, or perhaps in the mineral-rich waters around deep-sea vents, simple chemicals began to do something extraordinary. They began to organize themselves. Imagine tiny molecular dancers, bumping into each other in the ancient oceans, occasionally finding perfect partners, and joining in increasingly complex choreographies. Carbon atoms, those versatile building blocks that would eventually help form your DNA, began linking with hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in patterns that could store information and, even more remarkably, copy themselves. The first life wasn't like anything you'd recognize. These weren't cells with neat boundaries and organized interiors. They were more like chemical storms that had learned to sustain themselves. They were protocells, simple bags of self-replicating molecules that marked the boundary between chemistry and biology. And here's what's truly humbling. Every single living thing on Earth today, from the smallest bacteria to the largest whale, from the most delicate flower to you, can trace its lineage back to these humble molecular beginnings. For nearly 2 billion years, a stretch of time so vast that it dwarfs all of recorded human history, life remained microscopically simple. Single-celled organisms ruled the world. But don't mistake simple for unsuccessful. These tiny pioneers were busy changing everything. They were the first chemists, the first engineers, the first environmental engineers. Cyanobacteria, those ancient blue-green algae, began the slow process of pumping oxygen into the atmosphere, fundamentally transforming our planet's chemistry. This wasn't gentle change. It was catastrophic. The Great Oxidation Event, as scientists call it, was essentially the first mass extinction. Oxygen, which we think of as the breath of life, was actually toxic to most early life forms. It was like the planet's atmosphere suddenly filling with poison gas. But life, in its infinite adaptability, didn't just survive. It learned to harness this deadly gas and turn it into fuel. And then roughly 2 billion years ago, something extraordinary happened that would set the stage for your eventual existence. Simple cells began to swallow other simple cells. But instead of digesting them, they formed partnerships. These were the first eukaryotic cells, cells with nuclei and specialized internal structures. It was like tiny cities forming inside cells, with different districts handling different functions. The mitochondria in your cells right now, the powerhouses that fuel your every thought and movement, are the descendants of ancient bacteria that chose cooperation over competition. As we move through deep time, life began experimenting with new forms. The first multicellular organisms appeared like tiny communities of cells that had learned the power of working together. They were simple at first, just clusters of identical cells, but gradually, these cells began to specialize. Some became good at movement, others at sensing the environment, still others at processing food. Division of labor, that hallmark of human civilization, was actually invented by microscopic organisms hundreds of millions of years before the first human would ever walk the earth. The Cambrian explosion roughly 540 million years ago was like nature's greatest creative burst. In the geological blink of an eye, life forms of stunning complexity and diversity filled the oceans. Creatures with eyes, with shells, with grasping appendages, with sophisticated nervous systems appeared as if from nowhere. This wasn't gradual change. It was innovation on a scale that makes human technological advancement look leisurely. Among these early pioneers were our own distant ancestors, simple vertebrates, with the first primitive backbones, the first internal skeletons that would eventually become the framework that holds you upright today. They were like humans, these early fish-like creatures, but they carried within their genes the deep architectural plans that would eventually be expressed in your spine, your skull, your ribcage. The story of life on Earth is the story of endless experimentation, of countless failures and remarkable successes, of partnerships and competition, of catastrophe and recovery. Every extinction event that seemed to end the story only set the stage for new chapters. When the first mass extinction killed off most early life, it made room for more complex organisms. When asteroids struck and volcanoes erupted, the survivors emerged stronger and more adaptable. And through it all, through billions of years of change and challenge, a thin thread of genetic information was being passed down, modified slightly with each generation, carrying the accumulated lessons of survival, from the first self-replicating molecules to the magnificent complexity of modern life. You are not separate from this story. You are its current chapter, carrying within every cell of your body the molecular memory of this 4 billion year journey from primordial soup to conscious being. The humble beginnings of life on Earth remind us that the most extraordinary things often emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. In the next part of our journey, we'll follow that thin but unbroken thread of life as it ventures onto land, develops limbs, and begins the specific journey that would eventually lead to us. From fish to primates, our journey through deep time. Close your eyes and try to imagine the most important step your ancestors ever took. Not a step on the moon, not a step into a new country, but a step that happened roughly 370 million years ago. The very first step ever taken by a vertebrate onto dry land. It was clumsy, desperate, probably driven by necessity rather than curiosity. But that single step would eventually lead to every step you've ever taken in your life. Our journey from the primordial oceans to becoming primates is like following an ancient river backwards to its source, except this river flows through time itself. Each bend reveals ancestors that seem increasingly foreign, yet each carries the unmistakable signature of what you would become. It's a story of adaptation so gradual and yet so profound but it stretches the imagination to grasp its full scope. In the Devonian period, when the continents were arranged like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle scattered across the globe, the oceans teemed with fish of every imaginable variety. Among them were the lobe-finned fish creatures that looked unremarkable, but possessed something revolutionary hidden in their anatomy. Their fins weren't just flexible paddles, they contained the basic bone structure that would eventually become arms and legs. Picture a fish with fins that had tiny internal skeletons, primitive versions of what would one day become your upper arm, forearm, wrist, and fingers. These lobe-finned fish lived in shallow coastal waters that periodically dried up. When their aquatic homes began to disappear, some had a choice: die with the receding waters, or venture onto the hostile dry land. The first to make this transition were likely following pools of water, gasping and flopping from one shrinking pond to another. They weren't exploring, they were simply trying to survive. But in doing so, they were writing the first page of the terrestrial chapter of life on Earth. The transition from water to land required solving problems that no life form had ever faced before. How do you breathe air instead of water? How do you support your body weight without the buoyancy of the ocean? How do you prevent your skin from drying out? How do you move without swimming? These early amphibians, creatures like Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, were evolution's first attempts at answering these questions. Their solutions were ingenious if imperfect. They developed primitive lungs alongside their gills, like carrying both scuba gear and oxygen tanks. Their skeletons strengthened to support their weight against gravity's full force. Their skin became less permeable, though they still needed to return to water to reproduce. They were living bridges between two worlds, equally at home in neither, but capable of surviving in both. As millions of years passed, some of these early land dwellers became fully committed to terrestrial life. The reptiles evolved waterproof skin and eggs that could develop on dry land, a breakthrough as significant as the invention of spacesuits for exploring hostile environments. They diversified into forms that would seem fantastical today: massive sail-backed predators, early herbivores the size of elephants, and eventually the mighty dinosaurs that would rule the Earth for over 160 million years. But our story doesn't follow the dinosaurs, impressive as they were. Instead, we track a humbler lineage: small, furry creatures that lived in the shadows of the great reptiles. The earliest mammals appeared during the Triassic period, about 220 million years ago. They were tiny, likely nocturnal, and probably looked more like shrews than anything you'd recognize as related to humans. But they possessed innovations that would prove crucial. They were warm-blooded, they nourished their young with milk, and they had relatively large brains for their body size. When the Great Extinction Event, 66 million years ago, ended the age of dinosaurs, likely triggered by an asteroid impact that darkened the skies and transformed the climate, these small mammals inherited a world full of empty ecological niches. It was like a vast city suddenly becoming vacant, with endless opportunities for new residents willing to adapt to different neighborhoods. The mammals responded with an evolutionary explosion that rivaled the Cambrian. They grew larger, developed specialized teeth for different diets, evolved longer limbs for running, stronger claws for digging, and more complex social behaviors. Some returned to the sea and became whales, others took to the air as bats, still others grew to enormous sizes and roamed the grasslands. And then, somewhere between 85 and 55 million years ago, a particular group of mammals took to the trees. These were the earliest primates, the order that includes lemurs, monkeys, apes, and eventually us. Picture them as small, agile creatures with grasping hands and forward-facing eyes, perfectly adapted for life in the three-dimensional world of the forest canopy. Living in trees was like attending evolution's most advanced training program. It required precise depth perception, which led to forward-facing eyes and sophisticated visual processing. It demanded nimble hands capable of grasping branches of varying thickness, which led to opposable thumbs and sensitive fingertips. It necessitated complex spatial reasoning to navigate through interconnected branches, which promoted brain development. Every aspect of arboreal life was shaping the basic toolkit that would eventually make human civilization possible. These early primates weren't planning for the future. They were simply trying to find food, avoid predators, and raise their offspring in their chosen environment. But the forest was unconsciously sculpting them into something unprecedented. Their hands were becoming more dexterous, their eyes more acute, their brains more complex. They were developing the physical and neurological foundation for tool use, social cooperation, and abstract thinking. As the climate changed over millions of years, forests gave way to woodlands, and woodlands to savannas. Some primates adapted by becoming better at living on the ground. Their limbs lengthened for efficient movement across open spaces. Their social groups became more complex as they needed to coordinate movements across dangerous terrain. Their communication became more sophisticated as they needed to share information about distant resources and threats. By around 25 million years ago, the primate lineage had split into Old World monkeys, New World monkeys, and apes. The apes, our branch of the family tree, were distinguished by their lack of tails, their broader chests, their longer arms, and their more complex social behaviors. They were the intellectuals of the primate world, capable of using simple tools, recognizing themselves in mirrors, and displaying emotions and social relationships of remarkable sophistication. The journey from fish to primate spans over 300 million years and represents one of the most extraordinary transformations in the history of life. Your body still carries the evidence of this incredible journey. The bones in your arms follow the same basic pattern as those ancient lobe-finned fish. Your spine shows the modifications that allowed your ancestors to stand upright after millions of years of quadrupedal movement. Your hands retain the grasping ability that first evolved for moving through trees. Every breath you take uses lungs that first evolved in those desperate fish gasping for air in drying pools. Every step you take uses limbs that were once fins pushing through primordial waters. Every thought you think uses a brain that began its expansion in the challenging three-dimensional world of the forest canopy. This vast journey through deep time sets the stage for the next crucial chapter in our story. The moment when our primate ancestors made the revolutionary decision to stand up on two legs, forever changing the trajectory of life on Earth. Walking upright. The day we stood on two legs. Imagine the most revolutionary moment in human history. Not the invention of the wheel, not the discovery of fire, not even the first words ever spoken. Imagine instead a single moment, somewhere between 7 and 6 million years ago, when one of our ape ancestors made a decision that would change everything. Picture this ancient being, perhaps no taller than a modern 10-year-old, rising up from its knuckles, balancing precariously on its hind legs, and taking its first tentative steps toward becoming human. That moment, whenever and however it happened, represents one of the most significant transitions in the entire history of life on Earth. It was the day we began to stand apart, literally and figuratively, from every other creature that had ever lived. But here's what makes this moment so fascinating. It probably didn't feel revolutionary at all. It was likely just another day in the life of an ape trying to survive in a changing world. To understand why our ancestors stood up, we need to travel back to Africa during the late Miocene epoch, roughly 7 million years ago. The continent was experiencing dramatic climate change, not the rapid change we see today, but a gradual transformation that unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years. The lush forests that had sheltered primates for millions of years were slowly giving way to more open woodlands and eventually to vast savannas dotted with isolated groves of trees. For our ape ancestors, this environmental shift presented an existential challenge. They were perfectly adapted for life in the trees. Long arms for swinging, curved fingers for gripping branches, and bodies built for climbing. But as the forests fragmented, they faced increasing stretches of open ground between the safety of tree groves. The apes that could cross these dangerous gaps most efficiently would have access to more food sources and better territories. Natural selection began to favor those who could move effectively on the ground. But why bipedalism? Why not simply become better quadrupeds, like other ground-dwelling mammals? The answer lies in the unique advantages that walking upright provided in this specific environment. Standing on two legs elevated the head above tall grass, providing better sight lines to spot both predators and food. It freed the hands to carry things, food, tools, or infants across long distances. Most importantly, it was an energy-efficient way to travel across open terrain. Recent research has shown that human bipedal walking uses less energy than chimpanzee quadrupedal locomotion when covering long distances on flat ground. This might seem like a small advantage, but in the harsh mathematics of survival, small advantages compound over time. The apes that could travel farther with less energy could access better food sources, escape predators more effectively, and ultimately have more offspring. The transition to bipedalism wasn't sudden or complete. These early hominins, the term scientists use for human ancestors after the split from our common ancestor with chimpanzees, were still partially adapted for tree life. They retained long arms and curved fingers that suggest they continued to climb and sleep in trees for safety. They were living in two worlds, terrestrial by day, arboreal by night. Walking upright required a complete renovation of the ape body plan. The spine, which had evolved as a horizontal bridge in quadrupedal animals, needed to develop curves that would position the head over the pelvis when vertical. The pelvis itself underwent dramatic reconstruction, becoming broader and more bowl-shaped to support the weight of the upper body and internal organs. The leg bones lengthened and straightened, while the foot evolved from a grasping appendage, similar to a hand, into a rigid platform designed for efficient forward propulsion. These changes weren't without costs. Bipedalism made childbirth more difficult and dangerous as the pelvic opening became more constrained. It created back problems that persist to this day. The human spine was never perfectly engineered for upright posture, leading to the lower back pain that plagues modern humans. It made our ancestors more vulnerable when they ventured into open terrain, exposing them to new predators and environmental hazards. But the benefits outweighed the costs. Bipedalism freed the hands from locomotion, setting the stage for tool use and manipulation of the environment in ways no other animal had achieved. It allowed for new forms of social signaling gestures, postures, and facial expressions that could be seen from a distance. It positioned the head for better heat regulation in the open savanna, with the relatively hairless scalp exposed to cooling breezes, while the body remained in the shade beneath. Perhaps most importantly, bipedalism began to change how these early hominins thought about space and time. Walking upright provided a new perspective on the landscape, literally and figuratively. They could see farther, plan longer journeys, and conceptualize their environment in more complex ways. The cognitive demands of navigating across varied terrain while remaining vigilant for threats and opportunities may have provided the selective pressure that began expanding the hominin brain. The first clear evidence of committed bipedalism appears in the fossil record around 4.4 million years ago, with Ardipithecus ramidus, though even earlier species like Sahelanthropus chidensis show hints of upright posture. These weren't modern humans, they retained many ape-like features, and were likely still spending significant time in trees. But they had crossed the Rubicon of human evolution. They had committed to a new way of moving through the world that would define their descendants for millions of years to come. What's remarkable about the evolution of bipedalism is how it illustrates the contingent nature of human evolution. We didn't stand up because we were destined to become human. We stood up because it solved specific environmental challenges our ancestors faced in ancient Africa. If the climate hadn't changed, if the forests hadn't fragmented, if different selective pressures had been at work, the story of human evolution might have unfolded completely differently. Yet, once bipedalism evolved, it opened new evolutionary pathways that weren't possible before. It was like crossing a bridge that then collapsed behind our ancestors, committing them to a journey that would lead through tool use, fire control, language, and eventually to complex human societies. The simple act of standing up created the conditions that would make everything else possible. Every step you take today echoes that first revolutionary step taken millions of years ago by an ancestor whose name we'll never know, but whose courage, if we can call it that, in venturing upright into an uncertain world made your existence possible. The transition to bipedalism reminds us that human evolution is not a story of inevitable progress towards some predetermined goal, but rather a series of adaptive responses to environmental challenges, each opening new possibilities that our ancestors could never have imagined. In our next chapter, we'll meet one of the most famous of these early bipedal pioneers, Lucy, whose 3-million-year-old skeleton would revolutionize our understanding of human evolution and show us just how far our ancestors had already traveled on the journey from ape to human. Lucy's legacy, the first to walk like us. On November 24, 1974, in the remote Badlands of Ethiopia, a young graduate student named Tom Gray was walking with his supervisor Donald Johansson, when something caught Gray's eye. Half buried in the ancient sediments of the Hadar region was a small piece of bone that didn't look quite right. It wasn't the bone of any modern animal. It was something far older, far more precious. As they brushed away many of years of dust and sediment, they realized they were looking at the arm bone of one of our earliest ancestors, a being that had walked the earth over 3 million years ago. That night, as their camp celebrated to the sounds of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds playing repeatedly on a small tape recorder, They gave their discovery a name that would become synonymous with human evolution itself, Lucy. She was officially designated Australopithecus afarensis, but to the world, she would always be Lucy, the 3-foot-tall ancient grandmother of humanity, whose 40% complete skeleton would revolutionize our understanding of how we became human. Lucy lived approximately 3.2 million years ago, in what was then a very different Africa. The landscape around her was a mosaic of woodlands, grasslands, and lakes, a transitional environment that was perfect for understanding how our ancestors adapted to the shift from forest to savanna. She stood about 3 feet 7 inches tall and weighed roughly 60 pounds, making her about the size of a modern 6-year-old child. But don't let her diminutive stature fool you. Lucy and her kind were sophisticated beings who had solved one of evolution's greatest challenges. When scientists first examined Lucy's skeleton, they were looking at the fossil evidence of a revolution that had been brewing for millions of years. Her pelvis told a story of dramatic evolutionary transformation. Unlike the narrow, elongated pelvis of a chimpanzee, Lucy's pelvis was broad and bowl-shaped, perfectly engineered to support an upright torso, and the weight of internal organs arranged vertically rather than horizontally. The orientation of her hip socket, the angle of her femur, and the structure of her knee joint all screamed one unmistakable message: this being walked upright. But Lucy wasn't just a chimpanzee that had learned to stand up. She represented millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning that had created a completely new kind of primate. Her leg bones were proportionally longer than those of modern apes, giving her the stride length necessary for efficient ground travel. Her foot, while retaining some curved toes that hinted her arboreal past, had developed a heel strike pattern and rigid arch structure that characterize human walking. Perhaps most remarkably, Lucy's spine showed the distinctive S-shaped curve that positions the head directly over the pelvis when standing upright. This wasn't a simple modification of the ape spine, it was a complete architectural redesign. The vertebrae had changed shape, the angle of the skull's attachment to the spine had shifted, and the entire load-bearing structure of the body had been reimagined to support a vertical rather than horizontal orientation. Living alongside Lucy were other members of her species, and the evidence suggests they lived in small social groups that moved across the landscape together. Fossilized footprints discovered at Lake Etoli in Tanzania, dating to roughly the same period as Lucy, show 3 individuals, possibly a male, female, and juvenile, walking side by side across volcanic ash that preserved their steps like a snapshot frozen in time. Those footprints, stretching across nearly 250 feet, represent the oldest direct evidence of human ancestors walking upright together as a group. Lucy's world was both familiar and utterly alien. She shared the landscape with massive creatures that would seem mythical today: elephants with 4 tusks, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and crocodiles far larger than any living today. Early horses grazed alongside ancient antelopes, while overhead flew birds that had watched the dinosaurs disappear. It was a world in transition, gradually becoming more arid and open, creating the environmental pressures that favored bipedal locomotion. But what was Lucy's daily life actually like? The evidence suggests she and her companions were primarily plant eaters, using their strong jaws and large molars to process tough vegetation, fruits and seeds. They likely moved in small groups across the landscape, following seasonal patterns of food availability. Their days were probably spent foraging, with constant vigilance for predators that saw these upright apes as potential meals. Lucy's brain was about the size of a modern chimpanzee's, roughly 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, about 1/3 the size of a modern human brain. This means she wasn't crafting tools, controlling fire, or engaging in the complex social behaviors we associate with later human ancestors. But her brain was already beginning to change in response to the challenges of bipedal life. The cognitive demands of navigating complex terrain, coordinating group movements, and remembering the locations of distant food sources were likely beginning the slow process of brain expansion that would characterize human evolution. The discovery of Lucy and her contemporaries revealed something profound about human evolution. We had been walking upright for millions of years before our brains began their dramatic expansion. This overturned earlier theories that suggested brain growth drove the evolution of upright posture. Instead, Lucy showed us that bipedalism came first, creating the conditions that would later favor increased intelligence. Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, represents a crucial branch point in human evolution. They were the last of our ancestors to retain significant adaptations for tree climbing, while also being fully committed to bipedal locomotion on the ground. They were living bridges between our ape heritage and our human future, equally comfortable navigating the canopy and striding across open grasslands. The preservation of Lucy's skeleton was itself a minor miracle. For her bones to survive 3 million years and be discovered by scientists, a perfect storm of geological and environmental conditions was required. She likely died near a body of water, perhaps during a drought when water sources were scarce and dangerous. Her body was quickly buried by sediments, protecting her bones from scavengers and weathering. Over millions of years, minerals replaced the organic material in her bones, creating the fossilized remains that would eventually tell her story to the world. Lucy's legacy extends far beyond her own life and times. She demonstrated that our ancestors had solved the biomechanical challenges of bipedalism millions of years before they developed large brains, sophisticated tools, or complex language. She showed us that human evolution was not a linear progression from primitive to advanced, but rather a complex branching process where different traits evolved at different times in response to different environmental pressures. More importantly, Lucy reminded us that we are all part of an unbroken chain of life, stretching back through deep time. Every step you take uses the same basic biomechanical innovations that allowed Lucy to stride across the ancient African landscape. The curves in your spine, the structure of your pelvis, the angle of your knee joints, all bear the evolutionary signature of Lucy and her kind. Lucy's story is also a reminder of how recent human evolution really is in geological terms. 3 million years might seem like an incomprehensibly long time, but it represents less than 1% of the age of the Earth. In the grand sweep of life's history, the transition from ape-like ancestors to modern humans happened in the blink of an evolutionary eye. As we prepare to explore the next chapter of human evolution, the development of tool use, we carry with us the image of Lucy and her companions striding purposefully across the ancient African landscape, their hands free, their eyes scanning the horizon, their descendants destined to inherit the earth in ways they could never have imagined. The toolmakers, when hands learn to shape stone. Picture this moment. Somewhere in the highlands of Ethiopia, roughly 2.5 million years ago, one of our ancestors picked up a stone, not just any stone, but one with the right weight, the right texture, the right potential. They turned it over in their hands that had been freed by millions of years of upright walking, and saw something that no other creature had ever seen before. They saw not just what the stone was, but what it could become. With deliberate intent, they struck this stone against another, chipping away flakes, to create a sharp edge. In that moment of impact, when stone first met stone under conscious direction, something unprecedented happened on Earth. Our ancestors had moved beyond simply using what nature provided. They had begun to transform the physical world according to their own vision. They had become toolmakers. This wasn't just the birth of technology, it was the birth of a new relationship between mind and matter, between imagination and reality. For the first time in the 4 billion year history of life on Earth, living beings were systematically modifying their environment, not just through their biological evolution, but through their conscious actions. They were extending their bodies and minds into the material world, creating external organs that could cut, pound, scrape and shape in ways their biological equipment alone never could. The earliest stone tools, known as Oldowan tools, after the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania where they were first discovered, might seem crude to modern eyes. They were simple choppers, scrapers, and cutting implements made by striking one stone against another to create sharp edges. But these seemingly primitive creations represented a cognitive revolution, as significant as the development of language or the control of fire. Creating even the simplest stone tool requires a level of abstract thinking that sets our ancestors apart from every other creature. The toolmaker must envision the final product before beginning work, understanding that the stone in their hands contains, hidden within its bulk, the sharp edge they need. They must possess the spatial reasoning to understand angles of impact, the force required to create controlled fractures, and the hand-eye coordination to execute precise strikes. Most remarkably, they must be able to plan several steps ahead, understanding that removing this flake here will allow them to remove that flake there, gradually revealing the tool concealed within the raw stone. The beings who first mastered this technology were likely members of the genus Homo, our direct ancestors who had evolved from the Lucy-like Australopithecines. Species like Homo habilis, literally handyman, combined the upright posture inherited from their predecessors with increasingly sophisticated brains and more dexterous hands. Their skulls show the beginnings of the brain expansion that would characterize human evolution, particularly in areas associated with fine motor control and spatial reasoning. But why did our ancestors become toolmakers when other intelligent animals did not? The answer lies in the unique combination of traits that human evolution had assembled by this point in our story. Upright walking had freed the hands from locomotion, making them available for manipulation. Life in complex, three-dimensional forest environments and then on the challenging African savannas had favored the evolution of sophisticated spatial reasoning and problem-solving abilities. Social cooperation had created situations where tools could be shared, demonstrated and passed down through generations. Perhaps most importantly, our ancestors lived in environments where tools provided significant survival advantages. The African savannas were filled with large animals that, when they died, represented enormous caches of protein and fat, if you could access them. But these carcasses were protected by thick hides that even the sharpest human teeth couldn't penetrate, and they were often claimed by powerful scavengers like hyenas and big cats. Stone tools changed this equation dramatically. A sharp-edged chopper could slice through hide that would defeat fingernails and teeth. A heavy-duty scraper could strip meat from bones that other scavengers had abandoned. The archaeological evidence suggests that our ancestors were primarily scavengers rather than hunters during this early period of tool use. They likely followed vultures to fresh carcasses, used their tools to quickly access the most nutritious parts, the brain, bone marrow, and organ meat, and then retreated to safety before more dangerous competitors arrived. This scavenging lifestyle, enabled by stone tools, provided access to the high-quality fats and proteins that would fuel the brain expansion characteristic of later human evolution. Tool use also began to change human social dynamics in profound ways. Unlike biological adaptations which take thousands of generations to spread through a population, tool-making techniques could be learned and shared within a single lifetime. This created the first form of cumulative cultural evolution, the ability for innovations to build upon previous innovations across generations. A young hominin could learn tool-making techniques from their elders, add their own improvements, and pass these enhanced techniques on to their offspring. The evidence from archaeological sites reveals the sophistication that developed in early tool-making traditions. At sites like Gono in Ethiopia and Kuda Gono in the same region, archaeologists have found not just finished tools, but also the debris from tool manufacture. The flakes, cores, and hammerstones that reveal the step-by-step process of stone tool creation. These manufacturing sites show that our ancestors weren't just randomly chipping stones, they had developed systematic techniques for tool production that were passed down through generations. Different groups began developing different tool-making traditions, creating the first examples of material culture, distinctive ways of making and using objects that characterize different human communities. Some groups preferred certain types of stone, others developed specialized techniques for creating particular kinds of tools. These regional traditions represent the earliest evidence of what we might recognize as primitive forms of human culture. The cognitive demands of tool-making also began to reshape the human brain in measurable ways. Modern neuroimaging studies of contemporary stone toolmakers show that the process activates areas of the brain associated with language, suggesting deep connections between tool use and communication. The precise hand movements required for knapping stone tools may have paved the neural pathways that would later be co-opted for the fine motor control needed for speech. Tool use also changed how our ancestors thought about time and space. Effective tool use requires planning, anticipating future needs, remembering where suitable stone can be found, carrying tools across the landscape to places where they'll be needed. Archaeological sites show that early toolmakers were transporting raw materials dozens of miles from their sources, suggesting sophisticated mental maps and long-term planning abilities. The transition from stone chopper to more sophisticated tools happened gradually over hundreds of thousands of years. Around 1.7 million years ago, a new tool tradition appeared that archaeologists call a-Chilean, characterized by the elegant teardrop-shaped hand axes that would become the signature tool of early human ancestors for over 1 million years. These hand axes required hundreds of precise strikes to create and represent a level of planning and skill that suggests our ancestors had developed sophisticated teaching and learning systems. But the significance of early tool use extends beyond the tools themselves, in learning to see potential where others saw only raw material, in developing the patience and skill to transform vision into reality, in creating objects that extended their capabilities beyond their biological limitations. Our ancestors were laying the foundation for everything that would follow in human cultural evolution. Every technology you use today, from the simplest pencil to the most complex computer, traces its conceptual lineage back to that first moment when ancient hands learned to shape stone according to the mind's design. The story of the first toolmakers reminds us that human innovation has always been driven by necessity, ingenuity, and the willingness to see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. In the next chapter of our journey, we'll explore how our ancestors learned to harness perhaps the most transformative technology of all, fire itself. The firekeepers, how flames lit the human mind. Imagine the terror that fire once inspired in our ancestors. Picture them huddled in the darkness as lightning splits the sky, as wildfires rage across the savannah, as volcanic eruptions paint the horizon in terrifying reds and oranges. For millions of years, fire was the enemy, a force of destruction that sent every living creature fleeing in panic. And then somewhere between 1.5 million and 400,000 years ago, everything changed. One of our ancestors made a decision that would separate us forever from every other species on Earth. Instead of running from fire, they reached out and took it. The moment our ancestors learned to control fire marks one of the most profound transformations in human evolution, perhaps even more significant than walking upright or making the first stone tools. Fire didn't just change what our ancestors could do. It changed who they were. It altered their biology, their social structures, their relationship with the natural world, and ultimately their minds themselves. In taming fire, humans crossed a threshold that no other species has ever crossed, becoming the first and only creatures to harness the fundamental forces of nature for their own purposes. But how does a species that evolved to fear fire learn to master it? The transition likely happened gradually, over hundreds of thousands of years. Our ancestors probably began as opportunistic users of natural fires caused by lightning strikes or volcanic activity. They may have learned to keep such fires burning by feeding them fuel, gradually extending their duration and usefulness. Picture early hominins following wildfires, using the flames to drive prey into traps or to access the cooked meat of animals caught in the blaze. The evidence for early fire use is scattered but tantalizing. At Swartkrans in South Africa, archaeologists have found burned bones dating to over 1 million years ago, bones that show heating patterns consistent with deliberate burning rather than natural wildfire. At Qusam Cave in Israel, layers of ash and burned flint tools dating to 400,000 years ago suggest sustained, controlled use of fire for cooking and tool-making. Most remarkably, at sites like Terra Amata in France, archaeologists have uncovered what appear to be ancient hearths, deliberately constructed fire pits that represent some of humanity's earliest architecture. The ability to control fire transformed virtually every aspect of human existence, beginning with the most fundamental: what our ancestors could eat. Raw food requires enormous amounts of energy to digest, which is why modern great apes spend 6 to 8 hours a day chewing. Fire changed this equation completely. Cooking breaks down tough plant fibers, denatures proteins, and kills harmful bacteria, making food not only easier to digest, but also more nutritious and safer to eat. This dietary revolution had profound consequences for human anatomy and physiology. Cooked food required less chewing, allowing for the evolution of smaller teeth and jaws. The energy savings from easier digestion could be redirected to other functions, most notably to fuel the growth of increasingly large and energy-hungry brains. Some anthropologists argue that cooking was the key innovation that made possible the dramatic brain expansion that characterizes human evolution over the past 2 million years. Fire also extended the usable day. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, the species could remain active after sunset. The warmth and light of controlled fire allowed our ancestors to expand into colder climates that would have been impossible to inhabit otherwise. It enabled them to work on complex tasks during evening hours, mapping tools, preparing food, tending to the sick and injured. Most importantly, it created a social focal point around which human communities could gather, talk, and bond. The hearth became humanity's first true social technology. Imagine our ancestors sitting around fires as darkness fell. the flickering light illuminating faces that could express complex emotions, the warmth creating a zone of safety and comfort in an otherwise dangerous world. Here, around these ancient fires, human language likely flourished. The extended evening hours provided time for storytelling, for sharing knowledge about distant places and past events, for developing the complex social relationships that would become the foundation of human culture. Fire also transformed human technology in ways that would ripple through the millennia. Heat-treated stone became easier to shape and produced sharper edges. Wooden tools could be hardened in flames, making them more durable and effective. Fire could be used to clear land, to hunt by driving prey into traps, and eventually to smelt metals and create ceramics. But perhaps the most profound impact of fire control was psychological and cognitive. Mastering fire required a level of abstract thinking and long-term planning unprecedented in the animal kingdom. Firekeepers had to understand the relationship between fuel and flame, airflow and combustion. They needed to anticipate future needs and prepare accordingly, gathering dry wood during sunny weather, maintaining ember stocks during rain, knowing how to transport fire across long distances. The responsibility of maintaining fire also created new forms of social cooperation and specialization. Someone had to tend the flames during the night. Someone had to gather fuel. Someone had to know the techniques for starting fire from scratch when the flames died out. These roles required trust, communication and coordination at levels never before seen in the animal kingdom. The control of fire also marked the beginning of humans' relationship with technology as both blessing and burden. Fire provided unprecedented power and capability, but it also created new vulnerabilities and responsibilities. A poorly tended fire could destroy a camp. A lost fire could mean death in cold climates. For the first time, human survival became dependent not just on biological adaptations but on maintaining and transmitting technological knowledge across generations. Archaeological evidence suggests that different groups of early humans developed different fire-making and fire-keeping traditions. Some relied on friction methods, rapidly rubbing dry wood together to create sparks. Others may have used percussion techniques, striking flint against iron pyrite to generate sparks. Still others became expert at preserving natural fires and transporting them across long distances. These different traditions represent some of humanity's earliest distinct cultures, defined not by biological differences, but by shared technological knowledge. The mastery of fire also began to change how humans thought about themselves in relation to the natural world. Every other species adapted to their environment through biological evolution, growing thicker fur in cold climates, developing better eyesight for hunting, evolving digestive systems suited to available foods. But humans with fire could impose their own conditions on the environment. They could create warmth in cold places, light in dark places, and safety in dangerous places. This ability to modify environmental conditions, rather than simply adapt to them, may have been the cognitive foundation for all later human technological development. Once our ancestors learned that they could impose their will on natural forces, they had crossed a conceptual threshold that would eventually lead to agriculture, metallurgy, engineering, and ultimately to the complete transformation of the Earth's surface. Modern humans still gather around fires, still find comfort in flickering flames, still tell stories in firelight. These behaviors hint at how deeply fire became embedded in human psychology during the hundreds of thousands of years when controlled flame meant the difference between life and death. The warmth, light, and security of fire became associated with home, family, and community in ways that persist to this day. The story of fire control also illustrates how human evolution became increasingly cultural rather than biological. While our bodies continue to evolve in response to new environments and challenges, the pace of technological and social change began to accelerate far beyond the timescales of genetic evolution. Innovations like fire control could spread through populations within generations rather than millennia, creating feedback loops between culture and biology that would define the rest of human evolutionary history. Fire was humanity's first great technology, but it was also something more profound. It was our first step toward becoming the shapers rather than the shaped, the modifiers rather than the modified. In learning to control flame, our ancestors learned that the world could be changed, that natural limitations could be overcome, that the impossible could become possible through knowledge, skill, and determination. As we'll explore in our next chapter, The social cooperation required to maintain and share fire-making knowledge helped lay the foundation for the increasingly complex social brains that would become humanity's greatest evolutionary advantage. The social brain, why we needed each other to survive. Take a moment to consider something extraordinary about your daily existence. You are surrounded by strangers who don't want to kill you right now. You can walk down a street filled with people you've never met. And despite the fact that you're all large-brained primates descended from territorial ancestors, violence is so rare that its absence doesn't even register in your consciousness. You can enter a room full of strangers, and within minutes be laughing at shared jokes, coordinating complex activities, or working together toward common goals. This casual cooperation with non-relatives would be utterly impossible for almost any other species on Earth. This remarkable ability to live peacefully and cooperatively in large groups of unrelated individuals represents one of humanity's most distinctive evolutionary achievements. We are, in the words of anthropologists, the ultimate social species beings, whose success depends not on individual strength, speed, or ferocity, but on our unprecedented ability to coordinate behavior, share information, and work together in groups that can number in the millions, or even billions. But this wasn't always the case. The evolution of human sociality is the story of how our ancestors transformed from small bands of related individuals into the massively cooperative societies that characterize modern human life. It's a story of how surviving and thriving in challenging environments favored not just bigger brains, but specifically brains that were optimized for understanding and managing complex social relationships. The roots of human sociality stretch back to our earliest primate ancestors, who lived in small social groups that provided protection from predators and assistance in finding food. But as our ancestors descended from the trees and began to inhabit the more dangerous open savannas of Africa, the survival advantages of group living became even more pronounced. A lone bipedal ape on the African plains was vulnerable prey for any number of large predators, but a coordinated group of bipedal apes working together with primitive tools and weapons could defend themselves effectively and even compete with much larger and more powerful animals. This ecological pressure toward group living created what anthropologists call the social brain hypothesis, the idea that human intelligence evolved not primarily to solve technical problems or understand the physical world, but to navigate the complex social world of group living. Living successfully in a group requires an enormous range of cognitive skills, remembering who has helped you and who has cheated you, understanding hierarchies and alliances, predicting how others will behave in different situations, communicating complex information and coordinating activities with multiple individuals simultaneously. Consider what your ancestors needed to know to survive in a typical hunter-gatherer band of 30 to 50 individuals. They needed to remember each person's particular skills, preferences, and personality traits. They needed to track a constantly shifting web of relationships, alliances, and conflicts. They needed to understand unspoken social rules about sharing food, choosing mates, resolving disputes, and caring for children. They needed to be able to read subtle social cues, the meaning of a glance, the significance of a gesture, the implications of someone's tone of voice. Most remarkably, they needed to develop what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other individuals have thoughts, beliefs, and intentions that may be different from their own. This might seem like a simple concept, but it's actually one of the most sophisticated cognitive abilities in the animal kingdom. Understanding that others have minds means you can predict their behavior, anticipate their needs, deceive them when necessary, and cooperate with them even when your immediate interests don't align. The development of theory of mind enabled our ancestors to engage in increasingly complex forms of cooperation. They could make deals for future benefits. I'll share my food with you today, if you'll help me hunt tomorrow. They could coordinate hunting strategies that required individuals to take on different roles and execute their parts of the plan without direct supervision. They could engage in collective childcare, where multiple adults cooperated to raise and protect the group's offspring. This expanding capacity for cooperation created positive feedback loops that accelerated brain evolution. Groups with more sophisticated social coordination could access better territories, exploit food resources more efficiently, and defend themselves more effectively. This success meant they could support larger group sizes, which in turn created even more complex social challenges that favored further increases in social intelligence. Archaeological evidence suggests that by around 500,000 years ago, human ancestors were living in groups large enough and sophisticated enough to coordinate complex activities like large game hunting. Sites from this period show evidence of planned hunts targeting massive animals like elephants and rhinoceroses, prey that would have required dozens of individuals working together with careful coordination and shared risk. But human sociality evolved beyond simple cooperation into something far more remarkable: the ability to share information and cultural innovations across generations, and even across unrelated groups. Unlike other social animals, whose cooperation is largely limited to immediate family members or small bands, humans developed the ability to learn from and cooperate with complete strangers based on shared cultural knowledge. Language played a crucial role in this process, but the foundations of human ultrasociality preceded the evolution of full linguistic communication. Our ancestors developed sophisticated systems of non-verbal communication, gestures, facial expressions, body postures that could convey complex social information. They created shared rituals, traditions, and behavioral norms that allowed strangers to quickly identify potential cooperators and begin working together. Perhaps most importantly, human ancestors evolved what anthropologists call cultural learning, the ability to learn not just from direct experience but from observing and imitating others. This type of learning is far more efficient than individual trial and error, allowing innovations to spread rapidly through populations and accumulate over generations. A young hunter could learn techniques that had been refined over many lifetimes, then add their own improvements to pass on to the next generation. This cultural learning created something unprecedented in the natural world: cumulative cultural evolution. While other animals can learn from each other and even pass simple traditions down through generations, only humans developed the ability to continuously build upon previous innovations, creating increasingly complex and sophisticated cultural adaptations. Stone tool traditions became more refined over hundreds of thousands of years. Fire-making techniques spread across continents. Hunting strategies became increasingly sophisticated as each generation built upon the knowledge of their predecessors. The social brain also enabled our ancestors to engage in what psychologists call collective intentionality, the ability to share goals and work together toward common objectives that benefit the group rather than just individuals. This allowed for the development of social institutions, shared moral systems, and collective decision-making processes that could coordinate the behavior of large numbers of individuals. Modern studies of hunter-gatherer societies provide insights into how these sophisticated social systems might have operated in prehistoric times. Contemporary groups like the Mungkurnig of southern Africa, or the Inuit of the Arctic, maintain complex systems of reciprocity, resource sharing, and conflict resolution that allow dozens of unrelated families to live together peacefully and productively. These societies demonstrate the remarkable flexibility and sophistication of human social organization, even without formal governments, written laws, or complex technologies. The evolution of the social brain also created the cognitive foundation for uniquely human traits like empathy, fairness, and moral reasoning. Living successfully in cooperative groups required the ability to understand and care about others' welfare, to develop systems for sharing resources equitably, and to create and enforce social norms that discouraged cheating and promoted cooperation. Brain imaging studies show that modern humans have enlarged regions associated with social cognition, areas that process facial recognition, emotional understanding, language comprehension, and theory of mind. These neural specializations represent millions of years of evolution favoring brains that were optimized for social living rather than individual survival. The social brain hypothesis helps explain why human intelligence is so different from the intelligence we might program into a computer or expect to find in a solitary species. Human cognition is fundamentally social cognition, thinking that evolved to understand, predict, and coordinate with other minds. This is why we're naturally good at reading social cues, but need formal training to understand mathematics, why we remember stories better than abstract facts, and why we're motivated by social approval and disapproval in ways that affect even our private behavior. The evolution of human sociality created the foundation for everything that would follow in human cultural development. Language, art, religion, politics, science, and technology all depend on our species' unprecedented ability to share mental states, coordinate behavior, and work together toward common goals. The social brain that evolved to help our ancestors survive in small hunter-gatherer bands ultimately enabled the creation of civilizations, encompassing millions of individuals. As we'll explore in our next chapter, this sophisticated social coordination provided the foundation for humanity's greatest migration, the expansion out of Africa, that would carry our species to every corner of the globe. Out of Africa, the great human migration begins. Stand at the edge of the Red Sea on a clear day, and you can see across the narrow strait that separates Africa from the Arabian Peninsula. The distance is less than 20 miles, a trivial gap in our modern world of jets and satellites, but a crucial barrier that our ancestors faced roughly 70,000 years ago. Picture a small group of early humans, perhaps numbering no more than a few hundred individuals, standing on those African shores and gazing across the water toward an unknown land. Their decision to cross that narrow strait would prove to be one of the most consequential journeys in the history of life on Earth. This wasn't humanity's first attempt to leave Africa. Archaeological evidence suggests that earlier waves of human ancestors had ventured beyond the continent, with some reaching as far as the Caucasus region of modern-day Georgia nearly 2 million years ago. But those early migrations represented expansions of different human species, Homo erectus and others, that would eventually go extinct. The migration we're focusing on was different. This was the journey of our direct ancestors, anatomically modern humans, carrying with them the genetic heritage that would populate the entire world. What drove our ancestors to leave Africa, the continent where humanity had evolved and thrived for millions of years? The answer lies in a combination of environmental pressures, population growth, and perhaps most importantly the development of technologies and social systems that made long-distance migration possible for the first time in human history. Around 70,000 years ago, Earth was in the grip of a severe ice age. Global temperatures were significantly colder than today, sea levels were much lower, and much of Africa was experiencing prolonged droughts that made traditional food sources increasingly scarce. Archaeological evidence from this period shows signs of severe population bottlenecks, times when human numbers dropped dramatically, perhaps to as few as 10,000 individuals across the entire continent. But this environmental stress, rather than simply threatening human survival, may have created the conditions that favored migration. Groups that could exploit new environments and food sources would have significant advantages over those confined to increasingly marginal territories. The same innovative thinking and social cooperation that had enabled humans to control fire and create sophisticated tools now turned toward the challenge of exploring and colonizing new lands. The humans who embarked on this great migration were not the same as their ancestors who had first learned to walk upright or make stone tools. By 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had developed sophisticated technologies, complex social systems, and most importantly, fully modern language capabilities. They carried with them advanced toolkits that included composite weapons, specialized hunting equipment, and the knowledge to create fire and shelter in diverse environments. Perhaps most crucially, they had developed what anthropologists call behavioral modernity, the full range of cognitive and cultural capabilities that characterize modern humans. This included symbolic thinking, as evidenced by the creation of art jewelry and burial goods, long-term planning abilities that enabled multi-generational migrations, and sophisticated social organization that could maintain group cohesion across vast distances and long time periods. The route out of Africa likely followed the coastlines where marine resources provided reliable food sources and fresh water was more readily available. These coastal migrations required new technologies and knowledge systems, understanding of tides and seasons, techniques for exploiting shellfish and other marine resources, and navigation skills that could guide groups along unfamiliar shorelines. Genetic evidence suggests that the entire non-African human population descended from a relatively small founding group, perhaps as few as 1,000 to 10,000 individuals who successfully made the crossing from Africa into Asia. This genetic bottleneck is still visible today in the reduced genetic diversity of human populations outside of Africa, reflecting our descent from this small group of successful migrants. Once in Asia, human expansion accelerated rapidly by evolutionary standards. Within perhaps 10,000 years, human populations had spread across the entire Asian continent, reaching as far as modern-day China and Southeast Asia. This expansion required continuous adaptation to new environments, from tropical rainforests to temperate grasslands to high-altitude plateaus. Each new environment presented unique challenges that favored different survival strategies and technological innovations. The speed of this expansion was unprecedented in the history of human migration. While earlier human species had taken millions of years to spread across much smaller geographic ranges, modern humans colonized entire continents in tens of thousands of years. This acceleration reflects the power of cultural adaptation, the ability to modify behavior, technology, and social organization, much more rapidly than biological evolution could adapt bodies to new environments. As human populations spread across Asia, they encountered diverse landscapes that shaped their development in different ways. Groups that moved into the northern regions faced harsh winters that favored innovations in clothing, shelter, construction, and food storage. Those who settled in tropical regions developed different toolkits optimized for rainforest environments. Coastal populations became expert at exploiting marine resources, while inland groups specialized in hunting large terrestrial mammals. These environmental adaptations began to create the first distinct human populations outside of Africa. While all non-African humans shared recent common ancestry, different groups began developing distinctive physical characteristics, cultural traditions, and technological specializations adapted to their particular environments. This was the beginning of human biological and cultural diversity as we know it today. The expansion into Asia also brought human ancestors into contact with other human species that had migrated out of Africa much earlier. Neanderthals had been established in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, while the recently discovered Denisovans occupied parts of Central and Eastern Asia. These encounters would prove crucial for human evolution, as we'll explore in upcoming chapters. From Asia, human expansion continued into previously uninhabited territories. Around 65,000 years ago, humans successfully crossed the water barriers, separating Asia from Australia, a journey that required sophisticated watercraft and navigation skills. This achievement is particularly remarkable because it represents the first time any human species had successfully colonized a landmass that had never been connected to other continents by land bridges. The colonization of Australia required not just technological innovations, but also cognitive abilities that anthropologists consider among the most sophisticated achievements of early human culture. Planning and executing ocean crossings demanded the ability to envision distant, unseen lands, to coordinate group activities across extended time periods, and to develop and maintain complex technologies like seaworthy watercraft. Meanwhile, other human populations continued expanding over land, eventually reaching Europe around 45,000 years ago. The European expansion brought modern humans into direct contact and competition with Neanderthal populations that had dominated the region for hundreds of thousands of years. The outcome of this encounter would reshape both species and ultimately contribute to the genetic heritage of all modern Europeans. The Great Human Migration out of Africa represents more than just a change in geographic distribution. It marks the beginning of humanity's transformation from a regional African species to a truly global one. The challenges of migration and colonization, adapting to new environments, developing new technologies, maintaining social cohesion across vast distances, accelerated human cultural evolution, and set the stage for all subsequent human achievements. Each new environment humans encountered presented novel problems that required creative solutions. Arctic conditions demanded innovations in clothing and shelter. High altitudes required physiological adaptations to low oxygen levels. Diverse ecosystems called for new hunting strategies and tool technologies. The cumulative effect of solving these challenges was an explosive diversification of human culture and technology. The migration out of Africa also established patterns of human movement and cultural exchange that continue to this day. The same restless curiosity and adaptability that drove our ancestors to cross the Red Sea 70,000 years ago continues to drive human exploration and innovation. So the technologies that enabled the first transoceanic voyages laid the conceptual foundation for all subsequent achievements in transportation and exploration. Perhaps most importantly, the Great Migration established humanity as Earth's first truly global species. Unlike any previous life form, humans became capable of inhabiting and thriving in virtually every terrestrial environment on the planet. This global distribution would prove crucial for human survival through subsequent climate changes, natural disasters, and other challenges that might have eliminated more geographically restricted species. The story of humanity's expansion out of Africa reminds us that we are all descendants of those brave pioneers who looked across unknown waters and decided to explore what lay beyond the horizon. Their courage, ingenuity, and adaptability in the face of unprecedented challenges created the foundation for everything that would follow in human history. As we'll discover in our next chapter, this global expansion brought our ancestors into contact with other human species, leading to encounters that would fundamentally alter the genetic makeup of modern humanity. Neanderthals and Denisovans, our lost cousins. In a limestone cave in Germany's Neander Valley, in the year 1856, Quarry workers made a discovery that would forever change how we understand human evolution. They uncovered a skull, unlike any seen before, thick-boned, with pronounced brow ridges, and a brain case as large as any modern human's, yet distinctly different in shape and proportion. The scientific community was baffled. Some dismissed it as the remains of a diseased modern human, others as a completely separate species. Little did they know they were looking at the face of our closest evolutionary cousins, beings who had lived, loved, created art, and struggled to survive in Ice Age Europe for over 300,000 years. Today we know this individual as the first recognized Neanderthal, member of a species that has become synonymous with primitive humanity in popular culture, but was, in reality, remarkably sophisticated. Homo neanderthalensis wasn't a shambling, brutish ancestor, but rather a parallel branch of human evolution beings, who shared a common ancestor with modern humans, roughly 600,000 years ago, and who developed their own unique solutions to the challenges of surviving in Ice Age Eurasia. Picture Neanderthals as they actually were: stocky, powerfully built humans adapted for life in cold climates, with brains that were actually larger on average than those of modern humans. Their distinctive anatomy tells the story of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in harsh northern environments. Their short, robust limbs minimized heat loss in freezing temperatures. Their barrel chests housed large lungs, adapted for extracting oxygen from cold, thin air. Their prominent brow ridges may have protected their eyes from glare off snow and ice, but it was their minds, not just their bodies, that made Neanderthals remarkable. Archaeological evidence reveals beings of considerable sophistication who created specialized tools, controlled fire with expertise that rivaled any modern human group, and developed complex hunting strategies that enabled them to take down massive Ice Age megafauna like mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses. They lived in organized social groups, cared for their disabled and elderly, and buried their dead with what appears to be ritualistic behavior. Recent discoveries have revolutionized our understanding of Neanderthal intelligence and culture. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists have found evidence that Neanderthals may have placed flowers on the graves of their dead, suggesting not just burial practices, but possibly even beliefs about death and afterlife. In Spain, cave paintings have been dated to over 65,000 years ago, created before modern humans even arrived in Europe, proving that Neanderthals were capable of symbolic thought and artistic expression. Neanderthals also demonstrated remarkable technological innovation. They created the first known adhesives by processing birch bark into sticky tar that could secure stone points to wooden spears. They developed sophisticated hunting weapons, including throwing spears that could bring down large game from safe distances. Some groups even created jewelry from eagle talons and shells, suggesting aesthetic sensibilities and possibly symbolic communication systems. The Neanderthal toolkit reveals minds capable of long-term planning and abstract thought. Creating their signature Mousterian stone tools required not just technical skill, but the ability to envision the finished product within raw stone and execute complex sequences of precise strikes. Some Neanderthal tools show evidence of hafting, attaching stone points to wooden handles, a technology that requires understanding of leverage, force dynamics and material science. Living in Ice Age Europe required Neanderthals to develop sophisticated survival strategies. They constructed complex shelters from mammoth bones and hides, created and maintained fires in challenging conditions, and developed seasonal migration patterns that maximized access to resources while minimizing exposure to harsh weather. Their survival in environments that challenged even well-equipped modern humans testifies to remarkable intelligence and adaptability. But Neanderthals weren't the only other human species our ancestors encountered. In 2008, DNA extracted from a tiny fingerbone found in Denisova Cave in Siberia revealed the existence of another previously unknown human lineage, the Denisovans. Named after the cave where they were discovered, Denisovans represent one of the most mysterious chapters in human evolution. What we know about Denisovans comes primarily from genetic evidence rather than fossils, since only a handful of bone fragments have been identified. But those genetic sequences tell a remarkable story. Denisovans were a sister group to Neanderthals, having split from the Neanderthal lineage roughly 400,000 years ago. They inhabited a vast range across Asia, from Siberia to Southeast Asia, and possibly even reaching into Oceania. Recent analysis of Denisovan DNA has revealed surprising diversity within this lineage, suggesting multiple distinct populations that were as genetically different from each other as modern humans are from Neanderthals. This implies a complex history of Denisovan evolution and migration across Asia that paralleled and sometimes intersected with the expansion of modern humans. The few Denisovan fossils that have been identified reveal beings adapted to diverse environments. Some lived in the cold mountains of Siberia, while others inhabited tropical regions of Southeast Asia. This environmental diversity suggests remarkable adaptability and possibly technological sophistication that enabled survival in varied climates and ecosystems. Perhaps most intriguingly, genetic evidence suggests that Denisovans may have developed high-altitude adaptations that were later inherited by modern Tibetan populations. The ability to thrive at elevations where oxygen levels are dramatically reduced requires specific physiological adaptations that take thousands of years to evolve. The fact that modern Tibetans carry Denisovan versions of high-altitude adaptation genes suggests sophisticated interactions between these species. Both Neanderthals and Denisovans developed in parallel with modern humans for hundreds of thousands of years, creating their own distinct cultures, technologies, and adaptations. When modern humans expanded out of Africa and encountered these species, the meetings weren't just brief contact. They were extended interactions involving trade, cooperation, competition, and ultimately, interbreeding. Archaeological evidence suggests complex relationships between modern humans and Neanderthals in Europe. Some sites show evidence of technological exchange, with Neanderthal tools appearing in modern human sites, and vice versa. This suggests not just contact but possibly trade relationships or cultural learning between the species. The coexistence wasn't always peaceful. Competition for resources during harsh Ice Age conditions may have led to conflict between human groups. Some sites show evidence of violence, though it's unclear whether this represents interspecies conflict or violence within species. The ultimate disappearance of Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago, shortly after modern humans became established in Europe, suggests that competition may have played a role in their extinction. But the story of human Neanderthal-Denisovan interaction extends far beyond competition and conflict. Genetic evidence has revealed that these weren't just encounters between separate species, they were meetings between close relatives capable of producing fertile offspring. The genetic legacy of these interactions continues to influence human evolution today, as we'll explore in our next chapter. The discovery of Neanderthals and Denisovans has fundamentally changed our understanding of human evolution. Rather than a simple linear progression from primitive to advanced, human evolution emerges as a complex branching process with multiple contemporary species exploring different adaptive strategies. Modern humans weren't the inevitable outcome of human evolution. We were one successful experiment among several. These discoveries also highlight the remarkable diversity of solutions that human-like intelligence can create. Neanderthals and Denisovans faced many of the same challenges as modern humans: survival in diverse environments, social cooperation, technological innovation, but they developed different approaches based on their own evolutionary histories and environmental pressures. The sophistication of Neanderthal and Denisovan cultures challenges assumptions about what makes modern humans unique. If other human species could create art, bury their dead, develop complex technologies, and adapt to diverse environments, then what truly distinguishes our lineage? The answer may lie not in any single capability, but in the specific combination of traits that enabled modern humans to ultimately dominate the planet. The story of our lost cousins serves as both a reminder of human evolutionary success and a cautionary tale about extinction. Despite their intelligence, technological sophistication, and hundreds of thousands of years of successful adaptation, both Neanderthals and Denisovans ultimately disappeared as distinct species. Their fate reminds us that evolutionary success is never guaranteed, and that even highly intelligent, culturally sophisticated species can face extinction when environmental or competitive pressures exceed their adaptive capabilities. As we'll discover in our next chapter, while Neanderthals and Denisovans may have disappeared as distinct species, their genetic legacy lives on in the DNA of modern humans, continuing to influence our biology and evolution today. Interbreeding and inheritance. Their genes still live in us. Look in the mirror and consider this remarkable fact. If you're of European or Asian descent, roughly 2 to 4% of your DNA comes from Neanderthals. If your ancestry traces to certain parts of Asia or Oceania, you might carry even more genetic material from our mysterious Denisovan cousins. The face looking back at you isn't purely that of Homo sapiens. It's a mosaic created by the interweaving of multiple human lineages across hundreds of thousands of years. You are, quite literally, a living testament to one of the most intimate chapters in human evolutionary history. This discovery represents one of the most profound revelations in modern anthropology, overturning decades of scientific thinking about human evolution and our relationship to extinct human species. For most of the 20th century, scientists believed that modern humans had completely replaced earlier human species, without any genetic exchange. Neanderthals and others were seen as evolutionary dead ends, separate species that went extinct, leaving no biological legacy. Then came the revolution of ancient DNA analysis. In 2010, an international team led by geneticist Svante Pääbo announced they had successfully sequenced the Neanderthal genome from bones tens of thousands of years old. When they compared this ancient genetic code to modern human DNA, they made a startling discovery: clear evidence of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals. Our ancestors hadn't simply replaced these earlier species, they had absorbed them, incorporating their genetic heritage into the expanding human population. The implications were staggering. Every person of non-African descent carries within their cells the genetic echoes of romantic encounters between modern humans and Neanderthals that occurred between 40 and 60,000 years ago. These weren't isolated incidents, but rather sustained patterns of interaction, interbreeding, and genetic exchange that continued for thousands of years as the two species shared the landscapes of Ice Age Eurasia. But how is such interbreeding even possible between supposedly separate species? The answer lies in understanding that human evolution wasn't a neat branching tree with distinct species evolving in isolation, but rather a complex network of related populations that periodically came into contact, interbred, and separated again. Modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans were more like separate subspecies or closely related species that had diverged relatively recently in evolutionary terms. The genetic evidence suggests multiple episodes of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals. The first likely occurred in the Middle East around 50 to 60,000 years ago, as modern humans first expanded out of Africa and encountered Neanderthal populations already established in the region. Additional interbreeding events may have occurred later as modern humans spread across Europe and Asia, encountering different Neanderthal populations adapted to various regional environments. The pattern of Neanderthal DNA distribution in modern humans tells a fascinating story of ancient migration and settlement. The highest concentrations are found in East Asian populations, despite the fact that most known Neanderthal fossils come from Europe. This suggests that the primary interbreeding events occurred in Central Asia, and that the modern human populations carrying this mixed genetic heritage subsequently migrated both westward into Europe and eastward into Asia. Denisovan genetic heritage shows an even more complex pattern of ancient interbreeding. While Denisovan DNA is found at low levels in most Asian populations, it reaches much higher concentrations in certain groups. Modern Melanesians and Australian Aboriginals carry roughly 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA, suggesting sustained interbreeding between Denisovans and the ancestors of these populations as they migrated through Southeast Asia toward Australia. Even more remarkably, some populations show evidence of interbreeding with multiple Denisovan lineages. Recent genetic analysis suggests that the ancestors of modern Papuans interbred with at least 2 distinct Denisovan populations, implying a complex history of human species interaction across Asia that we're only beginning to understand. The biological significance of this ancient interbreeding extends far beyond mere historical curiosity. These inherited genetic variants continue to influence human biology today, affecting everything from immune system function to high-altitude adaptation to disease susceptibility. In essence, the genetic contributions of our extinct cousins became incorporated into the human gene pool, where natural selection could continue to act upon them. Some of the most dramatic examples involve adaptations to extreme environments. Tibetan populations carry Denisovan versions of genes that help them thrive at high altitudes where oxygen levels are dangerously low for most humans. The EPAS1 gene variant, inherited from Denisovans, helps regulate red blood cell production and oxygen utilization in ways that prevent altitude sickness and enable normal activity at elevations above 15,000 feet. This genetic gift from our extinct cousins enabled the successful colonization of the Tibetan Plateau, one of Earth's most challenging environments for human habitation. Similarly, some Neanderthal genetic variants appear to have provided advantages for surviving in cold climates. Genes affecting skin and hair pigmentation, fat metabolism, and cold tolerance show evidence of positive selection in human populations that moved into northern environments. The genetic toolkit our ancestors inherited from Neanderthals may have helped them adapt more quickly to the Ice Age conditions they encountered in Europe and northern Asia. The immune system shows perhaps the most dramatic evidence of beneficial inheritance from extinct human species. Both Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA contributed variants of genes involved in fighting infections and diseases. These ancient immune system genes, refined by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in different environments, provided modern human populations with expanded abilities to combat pathogens they had never previously encountered. The HLA genes, which play crucial roles in immune recognition and response, show extensive evidence of beneficial inheritance from both Neanderthals and Denisovans. Some HLA variants that are common in modern populations are more closely related to Neanderthal or Denisovan versions than to other modern human variants, suggesting they were acquired through interbreeding and then spread because they provided survival advantages. This genetic inheritance also helps explain some puzzling aspects of modern human disease susceptibility. Certain autoimmune conditions, allergies, and inflammatory responses show geographic patterns that correlate with levels of Neanderthal DNA inheritance. In some cases, genetic variants that once provided protection against ancient pathogens may now contribute to modern diseases in changed environmental contexts. The process of discovering and analyzing this ancient genetic heritage has required revolutionary advances in DNA extraction and sequencing technology. Ancient DNA is incredibly fragile, breaking down over time into smaller and smaller fragments. Extracting usable genetic information from bones tens of thousands of years old requires sophisticated techniques to amplify tiny amounts of surviving DNA while avoiding contamination from modern sources. The cold, dry conditions in many Neanderthal and Denisovan sites helped preserve DNA that would have been completely degraded in warmer, wetter environments. This is why most ancient human DNA comes from northern regions rather than from Africa, where much of human evolution actually occurred. The preservation bias means our understanding of ancient interbreeding is likely incomplete, with many interactions in tropical regions lost to the destructive effects of heat and humidity on DNA. Recent technological advances have pushed the boundaries of ancient DNA analysis even further. Scientists can now extract genetic information from cave sediments where ancient humans lived, even when no bones are present. This environmental DNA, or eDNA, is opening new windows into the presence and interactions of different human species in places where fossil evidence is lacking. The implications of ancient interbreeding extend beyond genetics into anthropology, archaeology, and our understanding of human social behavior. The sustained nature of genetic exchange between species suggests that when modern humans encountered Neanderthals and Denisovans, they didn't simply compete for resources or fight for territory. They formed social relationships, created mixed communities, and integrated their populations in ways that allowed for ongoing gene flow. This paints a picture of ancient human societies that were more flexible and inclusive than previously imagined. Rather than rigid species boundaries maintained by mutual hostility, the evidence suggests complex social dynamics, where different human groups could interact, trade, learn from each other, and form intimate relationships that produced offspring who were accepted and integrated into human communities. The genetic evidence also provides insights into the ultimate fate of Neanderthals and Denisovans. Rather than simply going extinct, they were absorbed into the expanding modern human population. Their disappearance as distinct species represents not complete extinction but rather genetic assimilation. In a very real sense, Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't entirely disappear, they became part of us. This process of genetic assimilation may have been facilitated by the relatively small population sizes of both Neanderthals and Denisovans compared to the rapidly expanding modern human populations. As modern humans moved into new territories, they may have outnumbered the existing populations by significant margins, leading to demographic absorption rather than replacement. The story of ancient interbreeding also highlights the arbitrary nature of species boundaries in human evolution. If Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans could interbreed and produce fertile offspring, were they really separate species in the biological sense? The traditional species concept, based on reproductive isolation, becomes blurred when applied to these closely related human lineages. Modern genetic analysis continues to reveal new complexities in the story of human-species interaction. Recent studies have identified possible contributions from yet other, unknown human lineages. Ghost populations that have left genetic traces but no fossil record. The human genetic landscape appears to be the product of a complex web of ancient population mixing that we're only beginning to untangle. The inheritance of ancient DNA also raises fascinating questions about human identity and ancestry. What does it mean to be human when our genomes carry the genetic heritage of multiple extinct species? Rather than diminishing human uniqueness, this genetic complexity actually highlights the remarkable success of our lineage in incorporating beneficial adaptations from multiple sources. Perhaps most importantly, the story of ancient interbreeding demonstrates that human evolution didn't end with the emergence of modern humans in Africa. It continued through migration, contact with other human species, and ongoing genetic adaptation to new environments. The humans who first left Africa 60,000 years ago were genetically different from their descendants who carry Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. Evolution continued through genetic mixing, natural selection, and adaptation. As we'll explore in our next chapter, this ongoing evolution included the development of perhaps humanity's most distinctive trait, language itself, which may have been influenced by these ancient genetic exchanges, and which would prove crucial for all subsequent human cultural development. The rise of language, how sound became thought. Pause for a moment and consider the miracle happening right now as you process these words. Somehow marks on a page or sounds in the air are triggering precise thoughts in your mind. Thoughts that mirror, however imperfectly, the intentions of someone who arranged these symbols perhaps hours, days, or even years ago. This extraordinary ability to share complex ideas through symbolic communication represents one of the most remarkable achievements in the 4-billion-year history of life on Earth. Language didn't just change how humans communicated, it fundamentally transformed what it means to be human. But when and how did our ancestors first develop this incredible capacity? The origin of human language remains one of the deepest mysteries in evolutionary science, partly because language leaves no direct fossil record. Words spoken by our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago have vanished into the air, leaving only indirect clues about when and how human communication evolved from the simple calls and gestures used by other primates into the infinitely flexible system that allows us to discuss everything from shopping lists to quantum physics. The story of language evolution begins with our pre-human ancestors, who already possessed sophisticated communication systems. Modern chimpanzees use dozens of distinct vocalizations, facial expressions, and gestures to convey information about food sources, social relationships, and potential threats. They can learn simple symbolic associations and even develop basic sign language skills when taught by humans. But there's a crucial difference between these communication systems and human language. Chimps can share information about present situations, but they struggle to discuss absent objects, hypothetical scenarios, or abstract concepts. Human language is characterized by what linguists call displacement, the ability to talk about things that aren't immediately present. You can discuss events from your childhood, plan activities for next week, or debate philosophical concepts that have no physical existence. This capacity to reference absent objects and abstract ideas may have been the crucial innovation that separated human communication from that of all other species. The evolutionary path toward language likely began with gestural communication. Our early ancestors, living in environments where visual contact was often possible, may have developed increasingly sophisticated systems of hand signals and body language. The same neural pathways that control fine motor movements of the hands also influence speech production, suggesting deep evolutionary connections between gesture and vocal communication. Archaeological evidence supports the idea that gestural communication preceded speech. The stone tool traditions of early humans required precise hand movements, and probably benefited from gestural instruction, one individual showing another exactly how to strike a stone at the correct angle to produce a sharp edge. These teaching interactions may have favored the evolution of more complex gestural vocabularies and the neural systems to support them. The transition from primarily gestural to primarily vocal communication offered several crucial advantages. Vocal signals could be used in darkness. When visual contact was impossible, they could be transmitted over longer distances than gestures. Most importantly, vocal communication freed the hands for other activities, tool use, food preparation, or caring for infants, while still allowing complex information exchange. But developing vocal language required overcoming significant anatomical challenges. The human vocal tract is uniquely configured among primates, with a descended larynx that creates a large resonating chamber capable of producing the full range of human speech sounds. This anatomical arrangement comes with costs. It makes humans more susceptible to choking than other primates, suggesting strong selective pressures favoring enhanced vocal communication abilities. The fossil record provides tantalizing clues about when these anatomical changes occurred. The hyoid bone, which anchors the muscles of the tongue and larynx, shows human-like characteristics in fossils dating back several 100,000 years. The shape of the skull base, which reflects the position of the larynx, also suggests that some degree of vocal tract modification had occurred in early human ancestors. But anatomy alone doesn't create language. It requires neural control systems of unprecedented sophistication. The human brain shows remarkable specializations for language processing, including dedicated regions like Broca's area and Wernicke's area that handle different aspects of speech production and comprehension. These neural specializations appear to have evolved gradually, building upon existing primate communication systems while adding new layers of complexity. Modern studies of language acquisition in children provide insights into how this complex system might have evolved. Children don't simply memorize words and rules. They appear to possess innate grammatical intuitions that help them extract linguistic patterns from the speech they hear around them. This suggests that natural selection shaped not just our ability to make and hear speech sounds, but also our fundamental capacity for grammatical thinking. The development of language created positive feedback loops that accelerated human cultural evolution. Groups with more sophisticated communication systems could coordinate more complex activities, share knowledge more effectively, and maintain social relationships across larger networks. These advantages would have favored further refinements in language ability, creating evolutionary pressure for increasingly sophisticated communication systems. Language also transformed human thinking in fundamental ways. The ability to name and categorize experiences allowed for more complex mental organization. Abstract concepts could be discussed, refined, and transmitted across generations. Hypothetical scenarios could be explored mentally before being attempted in reality. Language didn't just allow humans to share existing thoughts, it created new kinds of thoughts that weren't possible without symbolic representation. The emergence of fully modern language may have been relatively recent in human evolutionary history. Some researchers argue that the creative explosion of art, jewelry, and sophisticated tools that appears in the archaeological record around 50,000 years ago reflects the final maturation of human language abilities. This great leap forward could represent the point when human communication systems achieved the full flexibility and expressiveness that characterizes modern language. Other evidence suggests language evolution was more gradual, with increasingly sophisticated communication systems developing over hundreds of thousands of years. The complex social coordination required for controlled fire use, advanced tool manufacturing, and successful migration out of Africa all suggest that some form of language must have been present much earlier in human evolution. The interaction between language evolution and other aspects of human development created cascading effects throughout human culture. Language enabled the development of complex social institutions, religious systems, and accumulated knowledge traditions. It allowed for the emergence of specialized roles within societies, where individuals could develop expertise in particular areas and share their knowledge through teaching. Language also fundamentally changed how humans relate to time. Unlike other animals, which live primarily in the present moment, humans with language could maintain detailed mental models of the past and future. Stories could preserve knowledge across generations. Plans could be made and refined over extended periods. The human sense of identity became tied to narrative continuity, the story of who we were, are, and aspire to become. The geographical distribution of human languages provides clues about ancient migration patterns and population relationships. Languages evolve continuously, with new words appearing, pronunciations shifting, and grammatical structures changing over time. By comparing related languages and reconstructing their common ancestors, linguists can trace the paths of ancient human migrations and the splitting of populations. This linguistic archaeology has revealed that all human languages share certain fundamental characteristics, what linguists call universal grammar. Despite enormous surface differences, all languages have nouns and verbs, ways of forming questions and negative statements, and systems for indicating relationships between ideas. These universals suggest either common evolutionary origins or fundamental constraints on how human brains process language. The development of writing systems beginning around 5,000 years ago represents another crucial milestone in language evolution. Writing allowed for the preservation of exact linguistic information across time and space, enabling the development of complex literature, scientific texts, and legal codes. Written language also created new forms of thinking, allowing for the development of formal logic, mathematical proofs, and systematic philosophical arguments. Modern language continues to evolve, with new words appearing constantly and existing languages influencing each other through contact and borrowing. The rise of global communication technologies is creating unprecedented opportunities for linguistic exchange, while also threatening smaller languages with extinction. We may be witnessing the most rapid period of language change in human history. The evolution of language illustrates how human development became increasingly cultural rather than purely biological. While the basic capacity for language required genetic evolution of neural and anatomical systems, the specific languages humans speak are learned entirely through cultural transmission. This created the possibility for rapid cultural evolution that far exceeds the pace of genetic change. Understanding language evolution also provides insights into what makes humans unique among Earth's species. While many animals communicate, and some show impressive learning abilities, no other species has developed communication systems with the unlimited expressiveness of human language. This capacity for infinite expression from finite elements may be the key innovation that enabled all subsequent human cultural achievements. As we'll explore in our next chapter, language provided the foundation for another uniquely human capacity: the ability to create and share complex symbolic representations through art, setting the stage for the explosion of human creativity and imagination that would reshape the world. The birth of imagination, cave art, and the dawn of symbolism. Deep in the Chauvet cave in southern France, by the flickering light of primitive torches, human hands created something that had never existed before in the 4 billion-year history of life on Earth. Using charcoal and ochre pigments, these ancient artists, our direct ancestors living 36,000 years ago, painted magnificent images of lions, rhinoceroses, and horses on the cave walls, with such skill and artistry that they still take your breath away today. But these weren't just pictures, they were humanity's first steps into a realm that no other species had ever entered: the world of symbolic representation, abstract thought, and shared imagination. The moment our ancestors first mixed pigments and applied them to cave walls, they crossed a threshold as significant as walking upright or controlling fire. They moved beyond simply responding to the immediate physical world and began creating representations of reality, and eventually, representations of things beyond reality. They became the first species capable of externalizing the contents of their minds, making their thoughts visible to others, and preserving them across time. But why did humans become artists when no other species ever has? The answer lies in understanding that cave art wasn't just decoration or idle entertainment. It was the external manifestation of a cognitive revolution that had been building in human minds for hundreds of thousands of years. The same mental capabilities that enabled complex toolmaking, sophisticated social cooperation, and the development of language had reached a level of sophistication that allowed for purely symbolic thinking. The earliest evidence of human symbolic behavior predates the magnificent cave paintings by tens of thousands of years. In Africa, archaeologists have discovered ochre pigments that show evidence of grinding and preparation dating back to over 100,000 years ago. These pigments were likely used for body painting, decorating human skin with colors and patterns that conveyed social information, group membership, or individual identity. Even earlier, around 300,000 years ago, early humans were collecting unusual objects, fossils, crystals, and interestingly shaped stones, and transporting them to their living sites. These objects had no obvious practical function, suggesting they were valued for their aesthetic or symbolic properties. Our ancestors were already demonstrating the capacity to see meaning and beauty in forms, a crucial prerequisite for artistic expression. The transition from practical object use to symbolic representation required a remarkable leap in abstract thinking. When an artist draws a horse on a cave wall, they must understand that a series of lines and colors can represent something that isn't actually present. The viewer must also understand this symbolic relationship, recognizing that the image refers to horses in general rather than being a horse itself. This level of symbolic abstraction is something no other species has achieved. The cave paintings at sites like Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet reveal minds capable of extraordinary sophistication. These weren't crude stick figures or simple outlines, they were masterworks of artistic observation and technique. The artist understood perspective, used the natural contours of cave walls to create three-dimensional effects, and demonstrated intimate knowledge of animal anatomy and behavior. They had developed techniques for mixing pigments, creating brushes and drawing tools, and working in the challenging environment of deep caves by firelight. The subject matter of early cave art provides insights into the minds and lives of our ancestors. The vast majority of images depict animals, the large mammals that dominated Ice Age landscapes. Horses, bison, mammoths, lions, and other creatures are rendered with loving attention to detail that suggests both practical knowledge gained from hunting and a genuine aesthetic appreciation of these animals' beauty and power. Human figures are much rarer in early cave art, and when they do appear, they're often simplified or stylized compared to the realistic animal depictions. This might reflect taboos about representing humans, or it could suggest that the primary purpose of the art was related to the human relationship with the animal world, rather than human social relationships. Some of the most mysterious elements of cave art are the abstract symbols and geometric patterns that appear alongside the animal figures. Dots, lines, circles, and more complex patterns occur across different sites and time periods, suggesting they carried specific meanings that were shared across different groups of people. These symbols might represent the earliest forms of writing, or they could be records of astronomical observations, seasonal calendars, or spiritual concepts. The creation of cave art required not just individual artistic ability, but also sophisticated social cooperation. The deep caves where many paintings are found required careful planning to access safely. Light sources had to be prepared and maintained. Pigments had to be gathered from distant sources and prepared using complex chemical processes. Multiple people likely worked together on large compositions, requiring coordination and shared artistic vision. The social context of cave art creation may have been equally important as the art itself. These painting sessions might have been community events where knowledge was shared, stories were told, and social bonds were strengthened. The act of creating art together could have served as a form of group bonding that reinforced cultural identity and transmitted important information across generations. Recent discoveries have revealed that cave art was not limited to Europe, but appeared independently in other parts of the world. In Indonesia, cave paintings dating to over 40,000 years ago show that the capacity for artistic expression had developed in human populations that had migrated far from Africa. In Australia, rock art traditions stretch back at least 50,000 years, created by the Aboriginal peoples who first colonized that continent. The global distribution of early art suggests that the capacity for symbolic expression was a fundamental characteristic of modern humans rather than a later cultural innovation that spread from a single source. Wherever modern humans went, they eventually began creating art, suggesting that this behavior reflected deep-seated cognitive capabilities rather than learned cultural practices. Cave art also provides evidence for the development of what anthropologists call behavioral modernity, the full suite of cognitive and cultural capabilities that characterize contemporary humans. The creation of representational art requires abstract thinking, symbolic representation, aesthetic judgment, and the ability to share complex ideas through visual media. These are the same mental capabilities that enable modern humans to create literature, music, mathematics, and science. The techniques used to create cave art reveal remarkable innovation and experimentation. Artists used their fingers to smear paint, created brushes from animal hair and plant fibers, and even used hollow bones as spray painting devices to create stencils of hands and other objects. They understood how to use the natural properties of cave surfaces, incorporating bumps and crevices to create three-dimensional effects that make animals appear to move in flickering torchlight. Some cave art shows evidence of planning and composition that suggests sophisticated artistic traditions. Large scenes with multiple animals arranged in complex relationships required advanced planning and possibly preliminary sketches. The consistency of artistic styles within particular regions and time periods suggests that artistic techniques were being taught and transmitted across generations. The preservation of cave art for tens of thousands of years was itself remarkable. The artist chose locations and techniques that maximized the longevity of their work, often painting in deep caves where environmental conditions remained stable. They developed pigments and binding agents that could withstand the test of time, creating images that remain vivid today. Modern analysis of cave art using advanced imaging techniques continues to reveal new details about ancient artistic practices. Multispectral imaging can detect faded paintings invisible to the naked eye. Three-dimensional scanning creates precise records of cave surfaces and their relationship to painted images. Chemical analysis of pigments reveals the sophisticated knowledge our ancestors had of natural materials and their properties. The emergence of art coincided with other evidence of advanced human cognition, including the creation of musical instruments, personal ornaments, and complex burial practices. This cultural explosion around 40,000 years ago might represent the final maturation of modern human cognitive abilities, or it could reflect the crossing of a critical threshold in population density and social complexity that enabled rapid cultural innovation. The legacy of cave art extends far beyond its historical significance. It represents humanity's first conscious effort to leave a permanent mark on the world, to create something that would outlast individual lifetimes and speak to future generations. In creating these images, our ancestors were asserting their presence in the world and their unique capacity to transform reality through imagination and skill. Every form of human artistic expression that followed, sculpture, painting, literature, music, theatre, film, can trace its origins back to those first brave souls who looked at blank cave walls and saw possibilities. They established art as a fundamental human activity, as essential to our species as tool-making or language. They proved that humans are not just practical creatures concerned with survival, but also beings driven by the need to create beauty, meaning and lasting expressions of our inner lives. As we'll discover in our next chapter, this capacity for symbolic thinking and complex planning would soon enable our ancestors to make another revolutionary transformation: the shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture and permanent settlements. Agriculture and settlements. From hunters to builders. Picture a single grain of wheat. Hold it in your palm and consider that this tiny seed represents one of the most consequential partnerships in the history of life on Earth. Roughly 10,000 years ago, in the fertile river valleys of the Middle East, humans and grasses like wheat, barley, and rye entered into a relationship that would transform both species and ultimately reshape the entire planet. This partnership, what we call agriculture, didn't just change how humans obtained food, it revolutionized human society, population, technology, and our relationship with the natural world in ways that continue to define human existence today. For over 200,000 years, modern humans had lived as hunter-gatherers, moving across landscapes in small bands, following seasonal patterns of food availability, taking from nature what it provided. This lifestyle had served our species well, enabling the colonization of every continent except Antarctica and supporting populations that lived in sustainable balance with their environments. But around 12,000 years ago, everything began to change. The transition to agriculture, what archaeologists call the Neolithic Revolution, wasn't a sudden flash of inspiration, but rather a gradual process that unfolded over thousands of years as climate, population, and cultural factors converged to create new possibilities and pressures. The end of the last ice age around 11,700 years ago created more stable, predictable climates that favored the development of agriculture. Previously, the extreme climatic variability of the Ice Age had made it difficult to rely on particular plant species that might fail during bad years, but climate change alone doesn't explain why humans became farmers. The crucial factor was likely population growth. Archaeological evidence suggests that human populations were increasing during the late Pleistocene, creating situations where traditional hunter-gatherer territories could no longer support growing numbers of people. Groups faced a choice: continue dividing territories into smaller and smaller parcels that couldn't support viable communities, or find new ways to increase the productivity of the land. The solution came through the gradual domestication of wild plants and animals, a process that transformed both humans and the species they came to depend upon. Wild grasses like emmer wheat and barley grew naturally in the Fertile Crescent, but they had characteristics that made them challenging to harvest and process. Their seeds dispersed naturally when ripe, making collection difficult. Their tough hulls required extensive processing to access the nutritious grain inside. Through thousands of years of selective harvesting, storage, and replanting, humans gradually transformed these wild grasses into domesticated crops. The process selected for plants with seeds that remained attached to the stalk when ripe, making them easier to harvest in bulk. It favored varieties with thinner hulls that were easier to process. Most importantly, it created plants that were completely dependent on human care for survival. crops that could no longer exist in the wild, but could produce vastly more food per unit of land than their wild ancestors. This transformation was mutual, just as humans were changing plants to better serve human needs. Agriculture was changing humans in equally profound ways. Farming required settling in one place for extended periods to tend crops, leading to the first permanent human settlements. These villages created entirely new social challenges and opportunities. For the first time in human history, people had to learn to live with the same neighbors year after year, to resolve conflicts without the option of simply moving away, and to coordinate activities across larger, more permanent communities. The stored surpluses that agriculture made possible transformed human social organization in revolutionary ways. For the first time, communities could support individuals who didn't spend their time directly involved in food production. This economic specialization led to the emergence of craftspeople, priests, rulers, and eventually complex hierarchical societies. The egalitarian social structures that had characterized hunter-gatherer bands gave way to more stratified societies with distinct social classes and concentrations of power. Agriculture also required the development of entirely new technologies and knowledge systems. Farmers needed to understand soil conditions, seasonal patterns, plant diseases, and pest management. They had to develop new tools for soil preparation, planting, harvesting, and processing crops. They needed storage technologies to preserve food across seasons and transportation methods to move heavy loads of grain. The domestication of animals proceeded alongside plant domestication and created additional transformations in human society. Sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs were gradually transformed from wild species into domestic animals that provided meat, milk, hides, and labor. The management of livestock required new skills in animal breeding, veterinary care, and pastoral management. It also created new sources of zoonotic diseases, as humans lived in close contact with animals and their pathogens. The agricultural revolution wasn't limited to the Middle East. Similar transitions occurred independently in several other regions around the world, each based on different local species and environmental conditions. In East Asia, rice and millet became the foundation crops. In Mesoamerica, corn, beans, and squash formed the agricultural trinity. The Andes saw the domestication of potatoes and quinoa. Sub-Saharan Africa developed agriculture based on yams, sorghum, and African rice. These independent agricultural revolutions demonstrate that the transition to farming reflected fundamental changes in human cognitive and social capabilities, rather than a single lucky discovery. The knowledge and skills required for successful agriculture, long-term planning, understanding of biological processes, social coordination, and technological innovation were present in human populations around the world, and emerged when environmental and social conditions favored their application. The consequences of agriculture extended far beyond the communities that first adopted it. Agricultural societies could support much larger populations than hunter-gatherer groups, leading to rapid population growth in farming regions. These larger populations provided more opportunities for technological innovation, social experimentation, and cultural development. They also created military advantages that often allowed agricultural societies to expand at the expense of hunter-gatherer neighbors. The environmental impacts of agriculture were equally profound. Farming required clearing natural vegetation to create fields, leading to the first large-scale human modifications of natural landscapes. Irrigation systems redirected water flows, creating artificial wetlands in some areas while draining natural marshes in others. The concentration of human populations in permanent settlements created pollution and waste management challenges that had never existed before. Agriculture also began to change human biology in measurable ways. The shift to grain-based diets created new selective pressures that favored genetic variants that could better process agricultural foods. Lactose tolerance, which allows adults to digest milk, evolved independently in several populations that practiced dairy farming. The ability to efficiently process starch from grains was enhanced by increases in amylase gene copies in some agricultural populations. The social innovations required by agricultural life laid the groundwork for all subsequent human cultural development. The need to coordinate planting and harvesting activities required more sophisticated systems of timekeeping and calendar development. The management of stored surpluses necessitated the development of accounting systems that eventually led to writing. The resolution of disputes in permanent communities contributed to the development of legal systems and formal governance structures. Trade networks expanded dramatically as agricultural communities developed surpluses that could be exchanged for materials not available locally. These trading relationships spread not just goods, but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices across vast distances. The Silk Road, Mediterranean trade networks, and trans-Saharan caravan routes all had their origins in the economic opportunities created by agricultural surpluses. The religious and philosophical implications of agriculture were equally significant. Farming required understanding and working with natural cycles in ways that hunter-gatherer life did not. Agricultural societies developed complex religious systems focused on fertility, seasonal cycles, and the relationship between human activity and natural productivity. The ability to produce more food than immediately needed also created time for contemplation, philosophical speculation, and the development of formal religious institutions. Agriculture also changed humanity's relationship with time and planning. Hunter-gatherers lived primarily in the present, responding to immediate opportunities and challenges. Farmers had to think seasons and years ahead, planning for planting, managing crops through long growing seasons, and preparing for lean periods between harvests. This extension of temporal planning may have contributed to the development of more sophisticated abstract thinking and future-oriented decision-making. The transition to agriculture represents one of the most dramatic transformations in human history, rivaling the development of language or the control of fire in its long-term consequences. It created the foundation for cities, states, writing systems, and all the complex technologies and social institutions that characterize modern human civilization. Yet it also created new vulnerabilities: dependence on particular crops, susceptibility to famine, social inequality, and environmental degradation that continue to challenge human societies today. The story of agriculture reminds us that human evolution didn't end with the development of modern anatomy and cognitive capabilities. Cultural evolution continued to transform human societies, creating new selective pressures and environmental challenges that shaped both human biology and human culture. The partnership between humans and domesticated species that began 10,000 years ago continues to evolve today, as we grapple with the challenges of feeding billions of people while maintaining environmental sustainability. As we'll explore in our next chapter, the agricultural revolution created the stable conditions that allowed for the preservation of human remains and artifacts that would become crucial for understanding our evolutionary history. The fossils, tools, and other evidence that tell the story of how we became human. Skulls, spines, and stone. How fossils reveal our past. Have you ever held a seashell and wondered about the ocean it once called home? There's something magical about touching something that existed long before you were born, long before anyone you've ever known was born. Now imagine holding a piece of stone that once cradled a human brain from 3 million years ago. That's the quiet thrill paleontologists feel every time they brush dust from an ancient skull. In the dusty hills of Africa, under the relentless sun, scientists have been piecing together the most incredible jigsaw puzzle in history. But this isn't a puzzle with a picture on the box to guide them. This is a puzzle where most pieces are missing, scattered across continents and buried under millions of years of Earth. Each fossil they find is like discovering a single word from a lost library. And somehow, from these scattered words they're rebuilding the entire story of us. Picture Mary Leakey in 1974, crouched in the Ethiopian desert, her hands trembling as she realizes what she's looking at. Not just any bone, but a piece of an arm that belonged to someone who walked upright over 3 million years ago. They named her Lucy, this ancient grandmother of ours, and she changed everything we thought we knew about becoming human. But Lucy was just the beginning. Every skull tells a story that's both scientific and deeply personal. Take the cranium of Homo erectus, discovered in Java over a century ago. When you hold a cast of that skull, you're not just holding bone, you're holding the home of a mind that figured out how to control fire, how to fashion tools with intention, how to care for the sick and elderly. Those thick brow ridges aren't just anatomical features, they're the architecture of survival, evolved to protect a brain that was learning to dream. The spine tells perhaps the most dramatic story of all. Imagine the moment, somewhere around 7 million years ago, when one of our ancestors first stood fully up, not the awkward temporary standing that chimpanzees sometimes do, but the confident, committed posture that would define our species forever. This wasn't just a physical change, it was a revolution that freed our hands to become tools of imagination. When paleontologists examine fossil spines, they're looking for a very specific curve, the S-shaped curve, that allows us to balance our heavy heads, while walking upright. It's like reading the story of courage written in calcium and time. Each vertebra is a chapter about adaptation, about a species that chose to see the world from a new perspective, literally and figuratively. Stone tools scattered around ancient campsites whisper their own secrets. The oldest ones, dating back over 2.5 million years, are simple but profound. A rock deliberately chipped to create a sharp edge. It doesn't sound like much, until you realize that this represents the moment when our ancestors stopped just using what nature provided and started creating what they needed. The leap from finding to making is the leap from animal to something wonderfully other. But here's what makes fossil hunting so beautifully human. It's not just about the bones they find, it's about the stories they don't find. For every Lucy discovered, there are thousands of lives that left no trace, entire generations who loved, struggled, innovated, and died without leaving so much as a tooth behind. The fossils we do have represent such a tiny fraction of the human story that each one becomes precious beyond measure. Think about the famous Laeteli footprints, discovered by Mary Leakey in Tanzania. 3.6 million years ago, two early humans walked across volcanic ash that was just the right consistency to preserve their steps. Maybe they were walking together on purpose. Maybe they were following the same path by chance. But there, preserved in stone, are the footprints of what might have been the world's first recorded stroll. When you look at those footprints, you can almost see the two figures walking across an ancient landscape, their shadows long in the African sun. Were they holding hands? Were they talking? Did they pause to look at something interesting? We'll never know, but somehow, 3.6 million years later, we're still walking in their footsteps. The skull fragments tell us about brain size, but they also tell us about something more mysterious. The emergence of consciousness as we know it. When did self-awareness first flicker behind those ancient eyes? When did an early human first look at their reflection in water and recognize themselves? When did someone first grieve for the dead, or wonder about tomorrow, or tell a story just for the joy of telling it? Modern techniques have turned fossil hunting into something that would seem like magic to early paleontologists. CT scans can peer inside skulls without breaking them, revealing the shape of ancient brains. Chemical analysis can tell us what these early humans ate, how they moved, even what kind of climate they lived in. DNA extracted from bones can reveal family relationships across hundreds of thousands of years. But perhaps the most profound discovery isn't written in any single fossil, it's written in the pattern of them all together. The story they tell is not one of straight-line progress from primitive to advanced. Instead, it's a story of experimentation, of different groups trying different approaches to being human. Some emphasized bigger brains. Others focused on robust bodies. Some developed sophisticated tools. Others seemed to rely more on social cooperation. The beautiful truth that emerges from all these fragments is that there wasn't just one way to be human. There were many ways, many experiments in consciousness and culture. We are not the culmination of a single path, but the survivors of countless branching roads. Every fossil represents a different answer to the question, what does it mean to be human? And that brings us to perhaps the most humbling realization of all. We are not the end of this story. We are not evolution's final masterpiece. We are simply the current chapter in an ongoing experiment in consciousness, creativity, and connection. The fossils remind us that change is the only constant, that adaptation is the price of survival, and that every species, including us, is just passing through. The dust-covered bones in museum drawers aren't just scientific specimens, they're love letters from the past, messages in bottles thrown across the ocean of time, reaching us with a simple but profound message. You are not alone. You are part of something larger, older, and more wondrous than you can imagine. You are the latest verse in a poem that began millions of years ago and continues to be written with every breath you take. Why the brain grew? The metabolism of intelligence. Close your eyes and imagine your brain for a moment, not as an abstract organ, but as a living, breathing city of about 86 billion neurons. Each one connected to thousands of others in a network so complex that we're still trying to understand it. Now here's the remarkable thing, that incredible 3-pound universe, sitting inside your skull, consumes about 20% of all the energy your body produces. Your brain, despite being only about 2% of your body weight, is like a hungry teenager who never stops eating. This creates one of the most fascinating puzzles in human evolution. If big brains are so expensive to maintain, why did evolution give them to us? It's like asking why someone would choose to drive a gas-guzzling sports car when a fuel-efficient compact would get them where they need to go. The answer reveals one of the most beautiful stories in the history of life on Earth. Picture our ancestors around 2 million years ago living in the changing landscapes of Africa. The climate was shifting, forests were giving way to grasslands, and the easy life of fruit picking in trees was becoming harder to sustain. This is where the story gets interesting, because our ancestors faced a choice that would echo through millions of years. They could have gone the way of robust strength, developing powerful jaws and massive muscles like some of their cousins did. Instead, they chose something far more risky. They chose intelligence. But intelligence comes with a price tag that nature doesn't hand out lightly. A larger brain needs more glucose, more oxygen, more everything. It's like upgrading from a small apartment to a mansion. Suddenly your utility bills go through the roof. So how did our ancestors afford this metabolic luxury? The answer lies in one of evolution's most elegant trade-offs. They learned to cook. Not just the simple roasting that other animals might accidentally discover in the aftermath of a wildfire, but deliberate, controlled cooking that transformed not just food but the entire trajectory of human evolution. When you cook food, you're essentially outsourcing some of your digestion to fire. The heat breaks down tough fibers, destroys harmful bacteria, and makes nutrients more available to your body. It's like having a sous chef in your stomach. This culinary revolution allowed our ancestors to have smaller, more efficient digestive systems. Think about it. If you've ever watched a gorilla eat, you've seen an animal that spends most of its day chewing tough plant material with massive jaw muscles and a digestive system that takes up enormous amounts of body space and energy. Our ancestors traded those big guts for big brains, and cooking made that trade possible. But the metabolic story of intelligence goes deeper than just calories and energy. The brain's growth required a rewiring of how the body allocated its resources. During human development, the brain grows incredibly rapidly in the first few years of life. A human baby is born with a brain that's already about 25% of its adult size, and it continues growing at an extraordinary rate. This is why human babies are so helpless for so long compared to other animals. Their bodies are putting almost everything into brain development. This extended childhood became another crucial piece of the intelligence puzzle. While other animals reach independence quickly, human children remain dependent for years, sometimes decades. This isn't a bug in our design. It's a feature. Those long years of dependency are actually extended learning periods. Time for that expensive brain to absorb the complex skills and knowledge needed to thrive in human society. The social implications of this metabolic investment are profound. A species that invests so heavily in brain development can't afford to lose individuals easily. This may be one reason why humans developed such strong tendencies toward cooperation and care for the vulnerable. From an energy perspective, every human brain represents an enormous investment. Losing one is like losing a library. Interestingly, the growth of human brains wasn't just about getting bigger, it was about getting better at being efficient. Modern human brains are actually smaller than those of some of our ancestors, like the Neanderthals. But size isn't everything. Our brains became more densely connected, more precisely organized, more efficient in their use of energy. It's like the difference between a powerful but fuel-hungry muscle car and a hybrid vehicle that delivers more performance per gallon. The development of language played a crucial role in making big brains metabolically worthwhile. Language allowed humans to share the products of their thinking, to pool their intelligence in ways that no other species achieved. Instead of each individual having to learn everything from scratch, knowledge could be accumulated, refined, and passed down through generations. This meant that the metabolic investment in intelligence paid dividends not just for individuals but for entire communities and cultures. Think about what this means. When you learn something new, you're not just adding to your own knowledge, you're participating in a collective intelligence that has been growing for hundreds of thousands of years. Every insight, every innovation, every creative leap builds on the mental work of countless humans who came before you. Your brain is not just your own, it's part of a vast, interconnected network of human consciousness that spans time and space. The cooling system of the brain also had to evolve to handle the increased metabolic load. Humans developed more efficient ways of cooling their bodies, particularly their heads. This is why we lost most of our body hair but kept it on our heads. Hair on the head actually helps with cooling by creating shade and allowing sweat to evaporate more effectively. We became the only primates with dedicated cooling systems for our brains. The story of brain growth also reveals something beautiful about the nature of intelligence itself. Intelligence isn't just about individual problem solving. It's about the ability to participate in culture, to learn from others, to build on shared knowledge. The metabolic cost of big brains only makes sense in the context of social learning and cultural evolution. This brings us to a fascinating paradox. As human brains got bigger and more energy hungry, they also enabled us to become more efficient at gathering and using energy. Better tools, better hunting strategies, better food processing techniques, better cooperation. All of these emerged from brains that were expensive to run, but incredibly good at solving the very problems their own existence created. And perhaps most remarkably, these big expensive brains eventually gave us the ability to understand our own evolution, to piece together the very story I'm telling you now. We became the first species capable of studying ourselves, of understanding our place in the vast web of life, of contemplating our own existence and purpose. The metabolic investment in intelligence has continued to pay dividends in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. These energy-hungry brains have given us art, music, literature, science, philosophy. They've allowed us to explore not just the physical world around us, but the infinite landscapes of imagination and possibility. So the next time you feel mentally exhausted after a day of thinking, remember, you're experiencing the metabolic cost of millions of years of evolution's most expensive experiment. Your fatigue is the price of consciousness, the energy bill for being part of the most complex and creative species ever to emerge on this planet. The evolution of emotion, love, fear, and cooperation. Have you ever wondered why a piece of music can move you to tears? Or why the sight of a baby animal makes you smile without thinking? These aren't just random responses, they're echoes of an emotional architecture that has been millions of years in the making. Your feelings, as personal and immediate as they seem, are actually ancient stories written in the language of survival, connection, and hope. The evolution of human emotion is like watching a simple melody grow into a symphony. What began as basic survival responses in our earliest ancestors has blossomed into the rich, complex emotional landscape that makes us uniquely human. Fear that once protected us from lions now helps us navigate social situations. Love that once ensured we cared for our children now inspires poetry, art, and acts of extraordinary kindness towards strangers. Let's begin with fear, perhaps the most ancient of emotions. Picture an early human ancestor, perhaps 3 million years ago, hearing a rustle in the tall grass of the African savanna. In that moment, their heart would begin racing, their muscles would tense, their senses would sharpen. This wasn't just a physical response, it was an emotional one that could mean the difference between life and death. Fear was their guardian angel, whispering urgently, "Pay attention, be ready, survive." But as our ancestors became more social, fear evolved to protect not just physical safety, but social bonds as well. The fear of being rejected by the group became as powerful as the fear of predators, because for a social species like ours, isolation often meant death. This is why even today, the fear of social rejection can feel physically painful, because for millions of years, it often was a matter of life and death. Love tells an even more beautiful story. The capacity to form deep emotional bonds likely began with the simple need to care for helpless infants. Human babies require more care for longer periods than almost any other species, and this created evolutionary pressure for parents who could form intense, lasting emotional connections with their children. But love, like all emotions, proved to be wonderfully expansive. The neurochemical systems that evolved to bond parents with children, oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, these same systems began to activate in other relationships as well. Pair bonding between adults, friendships, alliances, and eventually the capacity to feel empathy and compassion for complete strangers. All of this grew from the basic mammalian ability to love our young. This expansion of love beyond immediate family created something remarkable, the possibility of cooperation on scales never before seen in nature. Humans became capable of caring about the welfare of individuals they'd never met, of sacrificing for abstract ideals, of working together toward goals that might not be achieved in their lifetimes. Love, which began as a simple parental instinct, became the foundation for civilization itself. Joy and laughter evolved as social glue, ways of signaling safety and strengthening bonds within groups. When our ancestors shared moments of happiness, perhaps after a successful hunt, or when children played safely in the evening light, these positive emotions reinforced the social connections that were becoming crucial for survival. Laughter, which exists in some form in many social mammals, became particularly sophisticated in humans. We became the only species that tells jokes, that finds humor in abstract concepts, that can laugh at ourselves. The evolution of sadness and grief reveals something profound about human nature. Many animals show signs of distress when separated from loved ones, but humans developed the capacity for complex, long-lasting grief that serves multiple functions. Grief bonds communities together in support of those who are suffering. It motivates us to remember and honor those we've lost. It even helps us learn from tragedy to prevent future losses. But perhaps most remarkably, humans evolved a capacity for anticipatory emotions. We can feel sad about things that haven't happened yet, excited about future possibilities, anxious about potential threats. This temporal expansion of emotion allows us to plan, to prepare, to hope in ways that other species cannot. We became time travelers of the heart, capable of emotional experiences that span past, present, and future. The development of complex emotions also required sophisticated systems for reading and responding to the emotions of others. Humans became incredibly skilled at detecting subtle emotional cues, the slight tightening around someone's eyes that indicates stress, the micro-expressions that reveal genuine versus fake smiles, the body language that communicates comfort or discomfort. This emotional intelligence became as important for survival as any physical adaptation. Mirror neurons, discovered relatively recently, help explain how we can literally feel what others feel. When you watch someone in pain, the same neural networks that activate when you're in pain become active in your brain. This isn't just metaphorical empathy, it's neurological empathy, an actual sharing of emotional experience that makes human cooperation and compassion possible on unprecedented scales. The cultural evolution of emotion has been equally fascinating. Humans began to create rituals, stories, and art that could reliably evoke specific emotional responses. Music that makes us feel connected to something larger than ourselves. Stories that help us process complex feelings. Ceremonies that mark important emotional transitions. We became the only species that deliberately cultivates emotional experiences for their own sake. Different cultures develop different emotional languages, different ways of expressing and interpreting feelings, but underneath this cultural diversity, the basic emotional systems remained remarkably similar across all human populations. Love, fear, joy, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust. These fundamental emotions are universal human experiences, evidence of our shared evolutionary heritage. The paradox of human emotion is that our most powerful feelings often seem impractical, or even counterproductive in modern life. The anxiety that once helped our ancestors detect danger now sometimes keeps us awake, worrying about emails. The love that ensured we cared for our children now sometimes makes us cry at movies about fictional characters. The anger that once motivated us to defend our territory now sometimes flares up in traffic jams. But these seeming mismatches between ancient emotions and modern life also reveal the incredible adaptability of human feeling. We've learned to channel fear into caution, anger into motivation for justice, love into creativity and art. Our emotions, evolved for one context, have proven remarkably flexible in helping us navigate entirely new challenges. The evolution of emotion also gave birth to morality, the sense that some actions are right and others wrong, regardless of their immediate practical consequences. The emotional responses of guilt, shame, indignation, and moral admiration create the internal landscape that makes ethical behavior possible. We became the only species that can feel bad about things we've done, even when no one is watching, and feel good about helping others even when there's no direct benefit to ourselves. Perhaps most beautifully, human emotions continue to evolve through culture and learning. Each generation finds new ways to express love, new sources of joy, new ways to cope with fear and sadness. We've learned to fall in love with ideas, to find beauty in mathematics, to feel awe when contemplating the vastness of the universe. Our emotions have grown beyond their original functions to become sources of meaning, creativity, and transcendence. The story of emotional evolution reminds us that our feelings aren't weaknesses to be overcome or inconveniences to be managed. They're the result of millions of years of refinement, sophisticated systems that helped our ancestors survive and thrive in an uncertain world. They're also the source of everything that makes life worth living: love, beauty, connection, purpose, and hope. When you feel deeply moved by something, a sunset, a piece of music, an act of kindness, you're experiencing the culmination of one of evolution's greatest achievements. You're feeling with a heart that has been millions of years in the making, shaped by countless generations of ancestors who loved, feared, hoped, and dreamed their way toward the emotional richness that defines human experience. Culture is a force of nature, how ideas evolved us. Imagine, if you will, the moment when the first human ancestor not just made a tool, but taught someone else how to make it. In that simple act of sharing knowledge, something extraordinary happened. Humanity became the first species to evolve, not just through genes, but through ideas. We became living libraries, each of us carrying not just our own discoveries, but the accumulated wisdom of everyone who came before us. This is the story of how culture became a second kind of evolution, one that moves not at the patient pace of genetic change, but at the lightning speed of learning and imagination. While genetic evolution takes thousands of generations to produce significant changes, cultural evolution can transform entire civilizations within a single lifetime. It's as if we discovered a way to evolve at the speed of thought. Picture a child born 40,000 years ago, in a cave in France, watching their grandmother mix pigments to paint animals on stone walls. That child wasn't just learning a skill, they were participating in humanity's first information revolution. Those cave paintings were our earliest attempts to store knowledge outside of individual minds, to create permanent records that could teach and inspire people not yet born. But culture is far more powerful than just accumulated knowledge. Culture actually shaped our bodies, our brains, our very biology. This is perhaps one of the most remarkable discoveries in human evolution. The realization that ideas can literally evolve us. Consider lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk. As adults, this trait evolved independently in several human populations, but only in those cultures that developed dairy farming. Culture, the practice of keeping milk-producing animals, created the evolutionary pressure that changed our genes. The same pattern repeats throughout human history. Populations that developed agriculture evolved different digestive systems than hunter-gatherers. Groups that lived at high altitudes developed enhanced oxygen-carrying capacity in their blood. Cultures that emphasized certain skills developed brain structures that supported those abilities. We became the only species that evolved itself through its own innovations. Language represents perhaps the most profound example of cultural evolution shaping biological evolution. The development of complex language required physical changes, alterations in throat structure, tongue flexibility, brain organization. But these biological changes happened in response to cultural pressures, the need to communicate increasingly complex ideas. Language evolved us, even as we evolved language. Think about what this means for how we understand ourselves. You are not just the product of millions of years of genetic evolution. You are also the product of thousands of years of cultural evolution. Every idea, innovation, and insight that has been passed down through the generations. Your thoughts are shaped by concepts that didn't exist when your great-grandparents were born. You think thoughts that would have been impossible for humans to think just centuries ago. The printing press, invented less than 600 years ago, represents a perfect example of how cultural innovations can reshape human consciousness. Before books became widely available, human memory was the primary repository of knowledge. People developed extraordinary abilities to memorize vast amounts of information, but printing changed. Not just how we store information, it changed how we think about information. With books, Humans could afford to forget details and focus on understanding connections, patterns, relationships between ideas. We developed new forms of thinking, more analytical, more comparative, more capable of handling abstract concepts. The printing press didn't just spread existing ideas, it made new kinds of ideas possible. The internet represents the latest chapter in this story, and we're still discovering how it's changing us. Just as the printing press altered human memory and thinking, digital technology is reshaping our cognitive abilities in real time. We're developing new skills, the ability to rapidly filter vast amounts of information, to maintain attention across multiple streams of data, to collaborate with people we've never met on projects we might never finish. But cultural evolution isn't just about technology, it's also about values, beliefs, social practices, the invisible architecture of human society, the development of concepts like justice, equality, individual rights. These aren't just political ideas, they're cultural innovations that have reshaped human behavior and even human biology. Societies that developed more cooperative, egalitarian cultures created environments where different traits were favored by natural selection. Consider the evolution of human cooperation. While many animals cooperate within small groups, humans developed the ability to cooperate with complete strangers, even people they'll never meet again. This extraordinary capacity for large-scale cooperation emerged through cultural evolution, the development of shared symbols, stories, values, and institutions that could bind together thousands or even millions of people. Money is a perfect example of cultural evolution at work. The ability to cooperate with strangers using abstract symbols of value, coins, bills, digital numbers on screens, represents one of humanity's most sophisticated cultural innovations. Money doesn't exist in nature, yet it has become one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior and evolution. Religion, philosophy, art, science, all of these represent cultural innovations that have profoundly shaped human development. They created new ways of thinking, new forms of cooperation, new sources of meaning and purpose. They also created new evolutionary pressures, favoring individuals who could navigate increasingly complex social and conceptual environments. The beautiful paradox of cultural evolution is that it makes us both more similar and more diverse. On one hand, successful cultural innovations spread rapidly across populations, creating shared human experiences. The ability to read, the concept of numbers, the appreciation of music, these have become nearly universal human traits through cultural transmission. On the other hand, different cultures develop different solutions to similar problems, creating remarkable diversity in human ways of life. The Inuit developed dozens of words for different types of snow. Pacific Island navigators developed extraordinary abilities to read ocean currents and weather patterns. Different cultures literally trained their brains to excel at different skills. This cultural diversity isn't just interesting, it's essential for human survival and flourish. Just as genetic diversity makes populations more resilient to challenges, cultural diversity gives humanity more tools for solving problems and adapting to change. Every cultural tradition represents a different experiment in being human, a different set of solutions to the challenges of living in complex societies. The speed of cultural evolution also means that humans are constantly adapting to environments that didn't exist when our genes evolved. We live in cities our genes never anticipated, use technologies our brains weren't specifically designed for, navigate social situations that would have been impossible for our ancestors. Yet somehow, through cultural learning and adaptation, we manage not just to survive but to thrive in these novel environments. Perhaps most remarkably, cultural evolution has given us the ability to deliberately direct our own development. We can identify problems and consciously develop solutions. We can preserve knowledge that might otherwise be lost. We can imagine better ways of living and work toward making them real. We became the first species capable of intentional self-improvement on a collective scale. The story of culture as an evolutionary force reminds us that human nature isn't fixed or predetermined. We are still evolving, still adapting, still discovering new ways to be human. Every generation inherits not just genes from their parents, but also the accumulated cultural innovations of all previous generations. And every generation has the opportunity to add their own innovations to this vast human inheritance. When you learn something new, you're not just adding to your personal knowledge, you're participating in the ongoing cultural evolution of our species. When you share an idea, solve a problem, or create something beautiful, you're contributing to the vast collaborative project of human development. that has been underway for tens of thousands of years. Culture made us human, but we continue to make culture. The story isn't finished, it's still being written. One idea, one innovation, one insight at a time. And you are both a product of this amazing process and an active participant in shaping where it goes next. Modern humans, what makes us uniquely us? Take a moment to consider something wonderfully ordinary. The fact that you can imagine a purple elephant riding a bicycle while simultaneously feeling nostalgic about a song you haven't heard in years. No other species on Earth can do this. While a chimpanzee might use a stick to extract termites, and a dolphin might recognize itself in a mirror, only humans can travel through time in their minds, combining impossible images with complex emotions, while pondering abstract concepts that exist nowhere but in our collective imagination. What makes modern humans unique isn't just one thing, it's the spectacular convergence of dozens of traits that, when combined, create something unprecedented in the 4 billion-year history of life on Earth. We are the species that became conscious of our own consciousness, that learned to ask questions about the meaning of existence, that chose to explore not just the world around us but the infinite landscapes of possibility within our minds. Let's start with perhaps our most distinctive trait: our relationship with time. Other animals live primarily in the present, with some capacity to remember the past and anticipate the immediate future. But humans are time travelers. We can relive experiences from decades ago with such vividness that they trigger physical responses in our bodies. We can imagine futures that may never come to pass and feel genuine emotions about them. We can even imagine alternate versions of events that already happened, wondering endlessly about what might have been. This temporal flexibility of human consciousness allows us to learn from experiences we never had, to prepare for situations we may never encounter, to feel empathy for people who lived centuries before us, or who might live centuries after we're gone. When you read a historical account of someone's suffering and feel moved by it, you're exercising a uniquely human capacity to emotionally connect across vast expanses of time. Our language capabilities go far beyond communication and venture into the realm of reality creation, while other species of communication systems, some quite sophisticated. Only humans use language to create shared imaginary worlds. We can talk about things that don't exist, might exist, should exist, or used to exist. We can have lengthy conversations about fictional characters, mathematical concepts, philosophical ideals, or scientific theories that exist nowhere but in the collective human mind. This linguistic creativity allows us to coordinate behavior on unprecedented scales. 1,000 humans can work together on a project, not because they all know each other, but because they all believe in the same set of abstract concepts. Money, laws, corporations, nations. These shared fictions become more real and more powerful than many physical realities. Consider human creativity, which operates on a completely different level from the innovative behaviors seen in other species. While a crow might learn to bend a wire to extract food, human creativity is generative rather than just adaptive. We create things not because we need them for survival, but because the act of creation itself brings meaning and joy. We paint pictures of sunsets not to communicate information about weather, but to capture and share the feeling of beauty. We compose music not to attract mates or warn of danger, but to explore the emotional possibilities of organized sound. Human creativity is also cumulative in ways that animal innovation is not. Each generation of humans builds on the creative achievements of previous generations, creating an ever-expanding universe of art, music, literature, and ideas. A modern composer has access to thousands of years of musical tradition, can reference classical symphonies while experimenting with electronic sounds that didn't exist a generation ago. This is creativity as evolution is, each new work carrying forward the best of what came before, while pushing into unexplored territory. Our capacity for abstract thinking sets us apart in remarkable ways. Humans can contemplate concepts that have no physical existence: justice, infinity, probability, causation. We can manipulate abstract symbols in our minds to solve problems, make predictions, and explore logical relationships. When you understand that 2 + 2 = 4, you're not just manipulating quantity, you're grasping an abstract mathematical truth that applies across all possible universes. This abstract thinking ability allows us to be the only species that studies itself scientifically. We figured out our own evolutionary history, mapped our own genomes, discovered the neural basis of our own consciousness, We've become the universe becoming conscious of itself, matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence. Human morality represents another unique evolutionary development. While other social species have behavioral rules and reciprocal relationships, humans developed complex moral systems based on abstract principles that often require us to act against our immediate self-interest. We can feel guilty about things no one else knows about, inspired by ideals that may never be fully realized, and motivated to help people we'll never meet. This moral sense isn't just about following rules, it's about the capacity to imagine how the world should be, and to feel emotionally invested in that vision. Human history is full of individuals who sacrificed everything for abstract moral principles: justice, freedom, equality, truth. This willingness to die for ideas that exist only in our minds is perhaps the most distinctively human trait of all. Our relationship with death is uniquely complex among all species. While other animals may show distress at the death of companions, humans are the only species that contemplates mortality as an abstract concept, that grieves for potential futures that will never be realized, that creates elaborate rituals and belief systems to cope with the knowledge of our own eventual non-existence. This awareness of mortality isn't just morbid, it's profoundly creative. Much of human art, philosophy, and meaning-making stems from our attempts to create something lasting in the face of our temporary existence. We build monuments, write books, have children, pursue legacy, all because we can imagine a future in which we no longer exist. Human play behavior extends throughout our entire lives in ways that are unprecedented in the animal kingdom. While young animals of many species play as a way of learning survival skills, adult humans play for the sheer joy of it. We create games with arbitrary rules, compete in activities that have no survival value, and find deep satisfaction in mastering skills that serve no practical purpose. Play for humans became a way of exploring possibility, of experiencing joy, of connecting with others through shared activity. Perhaps most remarkably, modern humans have developed the capacity for metacognition, thinking about thinking. You can observe your own thoughts, analyze your own emotions, and deliberately change your own mental states. You can catch yourself making assumptions and choose to question them. You can notice patterns in your own behavior and consciously work to change them. This ability to step outside ourselves and observe our own minds is like having a control room for consciousness. Our capacity for empathy extends beyond our immediate social groups to encompass complete strangers, other species, and even fictional characters. Humans can be moved to tears by the plight of people they've never met, can feel protective toward animals that pose no benefit to them, can emotionally invest in the fates of characters in books or movies. This expanded empathy isn't always practical from a survival standpoint, but it's created the foundation for unprecedented levels of cooperation and care. The human ability to find meaning and purpose in existence goes beyond simple goal-directed behavior. We don't just pursue objectives, we contemplate why those objectives matter, what they say about who we are, how they fit into larger patterns of significance. We can derive deep satisfaction from activities that serve abstract purposes, pursuing truth, creating beauty, reducing suffering, expanding knowledge. Modern humans have also developed the unique capacity for voluntary self-transformation. We can decide who we want to become, and then systematically work toward that goal. We can identify aspects of our personality or behavior that we want to change, and develop strategies for change. We can learn skills that don't come naturally to us, adopt values that weren't part of our upbringing, and even alter our own brain structure through deliberate practice and learning. What makes us uniquely us is not any single trait, but the remarkable convergence of all these capacities in one species. We are the animals that became conscious of being animals, that learned to transcend our biological programming through culture and choice, that discovered we could shape our own evolution through the power of ideas and imagination. We are the species that looks at the night sky and sees not just points of light, but distant suns around which other worlds might orbit. We are the species that can feel wonder at the mathematical elegance of a spiral galaxy, compose symphonies inspired by the sound of wind, and weep at the beauty of a sunset we know is caused by light scattering through atmospheric particles. In the grand story of life on Earth, modern humans represent something unprecedented, not just another species, but the first species capable of understanding and appreciating the story itself. We became evolution's way of knowing itself, consciousness examining its own origins, life contemplating its own meaning, and perhaps most wonderfully, we're still becoming. The traits that make us uniquely human continue to evolve, not through genetic change, but through cultural innovation and individual choice. Every human who learns something new, creates something beautiful, or acts with compassion, adds to the ongoing experiment in consciousness that defines our species. We are both the observers and the observed, the storytellers and the story, the question and the answer to what it means to be uniquely, wonderfully, impossibly human. Are we still evolving? The genetics of the future. Here's a question that might keep you awake at night. Are you more evolved than your great-great-grandmother? It's a deceptively simple question that opens up one of the most fascinating puzzles in modern science. While we tend to think of evolution as something that happened to our distant ancestors, the truth is far more intriguing. Evolution never stopped. It simply changed its methods, its pace, and its targets, in ways that would astound Darwin himself. The common misconception is that modern medicine, technology, and civilization have somehow put human evolution on pause. After all, if we can cure diseases, correct genetic disorders, and help people survive who might not have in the past, doesn't that mean natural selection no longer applies to us? It's a logical thought, but evolution, as always, turns out to be far more creative and persistent than we might expect. Let's start with a beautiful example that's probably happening in your own family tree right now. Lactose tolerance. The ability to digest milk as an adult has evolved independently in multiple human populations within just the last 10,000 years. That's practically yesterday in evolutionary terms. Some populations are now 95% lactose tolerant, while others remain largely lactose intolerant. This isn't ancient history, this is evolution happening at lightning speed in response to cultural changes like dairy farming. But the story gets even more interesting when we look at how evolution is adapting to our modern world. High-altitude populations in Tibet have evolved enhanced oxygen-carrying capacity in their blood within just 3,000 years of settlement. That's about 150 generations. A blink of an eye in evolutionary time. Their bodies literally adapted to thrive in environments where most humans would struggle to survive. The Bajo people of Southeast Asia, known as sea nomads, have evolved larger spleens to help them dive to extraordinary depths while holding their breath. Inuit populations have genetic adaptations that help them process high-fat diets and survive in extremely cold environments. These aren't changes that took millions of years. They're relatively recent adaptations to specific environmental challenges. Even more remarkably, we're seeing evolution in response to modern diseases. The HIV epidemic, tragic as it has been, has created evolutionary pressure that's already producing detectable changes in human population. Some people have genetic variants that make them more resistant to HIV infection, and these variants are becoming more common in affected populations. Evolution doesn't pause for human tragedy. It finds ways to adapt even to our newest challenges. The story of malaria resistance tells us something profound about how evolution continues to shape us. In regions where malaria is common, genetic variants that provide some protection against the disease have become more frequent, even when those same variants can cause other health problems. It's evolution's complex calculus. The benefits of malaria resistance outweigh the costs, so these genes persist and spread. But modern human evolution isn't just about disease resistance. We're also seeing changes in traits that might seem trivial, but actually represent adaptation to our changing world. Average human height has increased dramatically in many populations over just the past century, partly due to better nutrition but also due to genetic changes. Tooth size has been decreasing as our diets become softer and cooking techniques more sophisticated. Even jaw size is changing as we need less powerful chewing muscles. Perhaps most intriguingly, there's evidence that human brains are still evolving. Genes involved in brain development and cognitive function show signs of recent evolutionary change. Some researchers suggest that the pressures of living in increasingly complex societies may be selecting for enhanced cognitive abilities, better social intelligence, or improved capacity for cultural learning. The role of sexual selection in modern human evolution is particularly fascinating. While survival-based natural selection may be less intense than in the past, Mate choice continues to be a powerful evolutionary force. The traits that people find attractive, the characteristics they seek in partners, the decisions they make about reproduction, all of these continue to shape the genetic future of our species. Cultural factors are also creating new forms of evolutionary pressure. In societies where education is highly valued, there may be selection for genes that enhance learning ability. In environments where certain skills are crucial for success, genetic variants that support those skills may become more common. We're seeing evolution and culture interacting in increasingly sophisticated ways. The global nature of modern human society has created unprecedented opportunities for genetic mixing. People from populations that were separated for thousands of years are now meeting, forming relationships, and having children together. This genetic mixing is creating new combinations of traits and potentially accelerating adaptive evolution by bringing together beneficial variants from different populations. Technology is also creating new evolutionary pressures in unexpected ways. The widespread use of eyeglasses means that genetic variants causing nearsightedness may be increasing in frequency, since they no longer prevent people from surviving and reproducing successfully. Some researchers predict that future humans may be naturally more nearsighted, but also potentially better at close-up visual tasks. Reproductive technology is introducing entirely new variables into human evolution. In vitro fertilization, genetic screening, and other medical interventions are changing which genetic variants get passed to the next generation. While this isn't natural selection in the traditional sense, it's still a form of evolutionary change, guided by human choice rather than environmental pressure. The question of whether we're directing our own evolution becomes even more complex when we consider emerging technologies like genetic engineering. CRISPR and other gene editing tools give us the theoretical ability to make deliberate changes to our genetic code. We're approaching a point where revolution might become less about random mutation and natural selection, and more about conscious choice and design. But here's where the story takes a surprising turn. Even if we gain the ability to consciously direct our genetic evolution, we might discover that the old-fashioned kind of evolution, the slow, unconscious trial-and-error process that brought us this far, is still essential. Evolution through natural selection has a kind of wisdom that conscious design might lack. It's tested countless genetic combinations over millions of years, and found solutions that work in ways we might not expect or understand. The microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in and on our bodies, adds another layer of complexity to modern human evolution. These microorganisms are evolving rapidly in response to changes in our diet, environment, and lifestyle. Since our health and even our behavior are influenced by our microbial partners, their evolution is effectively part of our evolution too. Climate change is creating new evolutionary pressures that will likely shape human populations in coming centuries. Rising temperatures, changing disease patterns, altered food sources, and environmental challenges we haven't yet imagined will all create selection pressures that favor different genetic variants. Evolution never sleeps. It just finds new challenges to address. The speed of modern cultural change means that human evolution is constantly trying to catch up. We're living in environments that change faster than our genes can adapt to them. This creates a fascinating dynamic, where cultural evolution, our ability to adapt through learning and innovation, becomes even more important than genetic evolution for human success. Perhaps most remarkably, we're becoming the first species capable of understanding and potentially directing our own evolutionary future. We can study our own genes, predict evolutionary trends, and make choices about reproduction and technology that will shape the genetic landscape of future generations. We're evolution becoming conscious of itself. The question, are we still evolving, turns out to have a beautifully complex answer. Yes, but not in the way our ancestors did. We're evolving genetically, but slowly and in response to modern pressures. We're evolving culturally at breakneck speed. We're evolving technologically in ways that change what it means to be human, and we're on the verge of evolving consciously, making deliberate choices about our biological future. The human story is far from over. In fact, we may be entering the most dynamic phase of human evolution yet, a phase where biology, culture, technology, and conscious choice all interact to shape what we become. The future humans looking back at us may see our era not as the end of evolution, but as the beginning of evolution's most creative and intentional chapter. Your genes carry the story of millions of years of evolutionary history, but they also carry the seeds of evolutionary futures we can barely imagine. You are not just the product of evolution. You are evolution's next experiment, its latest attempt to understand itself and consciously direct its own unfolding story. Becoming Human. A story that never truly ends. Close your eyes and imagine, for a moment, that you could meet your ancestor from 1 million years ago. Picture the moment of recognition. Looking into eyes that would seem almost familiar, seeing in their face the echo of your own features, feeling the strange intimacy of shared DNA across an ocean of time. What would you say to each other? What would they think of the world you've created? What would you think of the world they survived? This imagined meeting captures something profound about the human story. It's not a finished tale with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's an ongoing conversation between past and future, a continuous process of becoming that stretches back millions of years and forward into possibilities we can barely imagine. Every human being is both the latest chapter in this ancient story and the author of its next pages. The story of becoming human began not with a single moment of transformation, but with millions of small changes, each one imperceptible in its time, but collectively revolutionary. A slight change in jaw structure here, a minor alteration in brain chemistry there, a new way of holding a tool, a different sound in the throat that eventually became language. Evolution doesn't work in dramatic leaps. It works in whispers that accumulate into symphonies. Think about what becoming human really means. It's not just about developing bigger brains or learning to walk upright, though those were certainly important milestones. Becoming human was about developing the capacity to ask questions about our own existence, to feel wonder at the beauty of a sunset, to grieve for people we've never met, to imagine worlds that don't exist and then work to create them. It was about becoming the species that could contemplate its own story and find meaning in the telling. But here's the beautiful paradox. The story of becoming human never actually ends, because we never stop becoming. Every generation discovers new ways to be human, new possibilities for consciousness, creativity, and connection. The humans alive today are different from the humans of 1,000 years ago, not just in what they know, but in how they think, feel, and relate to each other and the world around them. Consider how the definition of humanity has expanded throughout history. Our earliest ancestors might have considered human to mean only their immediate family group. Over time, the circle expanded to include the tribe, then neighboring tribes, then entire ethnic groups, nations, and eventually all of humanity. Today, many people extend their moral concern to other species, to future generations not yet born, even to the planet itself. We're still becoming more human by becoming more inclusive in our compassion. The tools we create don't just serve us, they change us. The invention of writing altered human memory and thinking. The printing press changed how we process and share information. The internet is reshaping our attention, our relationships, our very conception of knowledge and connection. Each technological leap creates new possibilities for human experience, and in doing so, creates new ways of being human. Language continues to evolve, carrying our consciousness along with it. Every new word we invent, every metaphor we create, every story we tell, adds to the toolkit of human thought and feeling. When someone coins a phrase that perfectly captures a previously unnamed experience, they're not just adding to the dictionary, they're expanding the boundaries of human consciousness. Art, music, literature, and creative expression represent ongoing experiments in what it means to be human. Every song that moves you, every painting that takes your breath away, every story that changes how you see the world, is evidence that we're still discovering new depths of human experience. Creativity isn't just decoration on human life, it's the engine of becoming, the way we explore and expand the possibilities of consciousness. The scientific understanding of ourselves continues to reveal new aspects of what it means to be human. Neuroscience is showing us how consciousness emerges from neural networks. Psychology is revealing the hidden processes that shape our decisions and relationships. Genetics is teaching us about our deep connections to all life on Earth. Each discovery doesn't diminish the mystery of being human, it deepens it, revealing new layers of complexity and wonder. Our capacity for moral growth shows no signs of reaching a limit. Each generation grapples with ethical questions that previous generations couldn't even conceive. Rights for women, minorities, LGBTQ individuals, animals, future generations, the environment itself, our moral circle keeps expanding as we discover new ways to recognize and respect the dignity and worth of others. Becoming human is in large part becoming more compassionate. The challenges we face today, climate change, technological disruption, social inequality, the search for meaning in an increasingly complex world, these aren't obstacles to becoming human. They're the raw material from which the next chapter of human evolution will be forged. Every challenge we overcome, every problem we solve, every way we learn to live better together, adds to the ongoing story of what it means to be human. Individual human development mirrors the species' journey of becoming. Each person recapitulates, in their own lifetime, aspects of humanity's long journey from helpless infant to conscious adult, capable of love, creativity, moral reasoning, and abstract thought. But unlike our evolutionary ancestors, each modern human has access to the accumulated wisdom, knowledge, and cultural innovations of all previous generations. You don't just become human, you become human in conversation with all the humans who came before you. The questions that define human existence haven't changed much over the millennia. Who are we? Why are we here? How should we live? What matters most? But our capacity to explore these questions, the sophistication of our approaches to them, the depth of understanding we can bring to bear, these continue to evolve. We're still becoming the species that can adequately address the fundamental questions of existence. Perhaps most remarkably, we're becoming the first species capable of taking conscious responsibility for our own evolution. We can study our own development, identify our limitations, and work deliberately to overcome them. We can choose to become more rational, more compassionate, more creative, more wise. The future of human evolution may be less about random genetic changes and more about conscious choices about who we want to become. The story of becoming human is also the story of becoming connected to each other, to other species, to the planet, to the cosmos itself. Modern science has revealed our deep kinship with all life, our dependence on natural systems, our place in the vast web of cosmic evolution. Becoming human means learning to see ourselves not as separate from nature, but as nature becoming conscious of itself. Children represent the living frontier of human becoming. Every child born carries forward the genetic and cultural inheritance of millions of years of human development, but they also carry the potential for innovations we can't imagine. They will face challenges we haven't thought of, develop solutions we can't conceive, and discover new ways of being human that will seem as miraculous to us as our ways of life would seem to our ancient ancestors. The beautiful truth about the human story is that it's not just the story of what we've become, it's the story of what we're still becoming. Every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, every creative breakthrough, every moral insight, every scientific discovery, every expression of love, adds to the ongoing experiment in consciousness that defines our species. When you learn something new, you're participating in humanity's endless education. When you create something beautiful, you're adding to the sum total of human creativity. When you show compassion to someone who needs it, you're advancing the long project of human moral development. When you wonder about the meaning of existence, you're carrying forward the ancient human tradition of philosophical inquiry. The story of becoming human is your story, not just because you're human, but because you're actively participating in the ongoing process of defining what humanity can become. Every choice you make, every relationship you build, every problem you solve, every moment of joy or beauty you experience, adds another page to the never-ending story of human becoming. And perhaps that's the most human thing of all, to be part of a story that has no ending, only endless new chapters waiting to be written. We are the species that became conscious of becoming, and in that consciousness lies the seed of all our future possibilities. The story of becoming human isn't just about where we came from, it's about the infinite potential of where we might go next. In the end, becoming human isn't a destination we reach, but a journey we continue with every breath, every heartbeat, every thought, every dream. We are still becoming, still evolving, still discovering new ways to be wonderfully, impossibly, beautifully human. And that journey, that endless, magnificent journey of becoming, is just beginning.